discussion is taking place around a contract, and the man says that she can talk to him if there is any problem with the terms of the agreement. He explains that it's just a standard marriage contract and that if she wants, she can add more conditions. But for the woman to add any condition wouldn't make the agreement better. This surprises him, and he asks what she means. Then she points to a specific part of the contract. It's where his name is, and because of that, the man, irritated, asks what the problem is, if maybe she doesn't find him suitable. However, she tries to explain herself, saying she's not saying she dislikes anything about him. After all, he's the head of the Postenmeier family, the most prestigious in the empire and the only Archduke. She's heard that besides being a good gentleman, he's also very rich. Approaching him, she asks if they haven't met before. The girl remembers that her life has always been like this, being the firstborn in this prestigious family, and now she must learn to become the successor. The education of successors begins in childhood, having to learn everything even while sleeping little, and during those moments to receive her parents' recognition. She was often forced to go through strict lessons since she was young, all for the sake of her family. She remembers that when she felt exhausted, she only heard words of criticism, saying that she was too naive if she thought becoming a successor was easy, and that she should study everything, even if she had to stay up all night for it, all for the good of the family. Then, when she turned 12, her brother Alphonse was miraculously born, stopping her training and sending her to the academy as if she were being expelled. However, her brother had fragile health, so when she was called back home, she was surprised with an arranged marriage. And once the boy was old enough, the position of heir would return to him. In addition, she was told that they could no longer afford her academy studies. Rosaline knew she was nothing more than a decorative piece for her family, without the right to decide anything about her own life. Raising his sword, the guard declares that members of the Crimson Rose family who violate the state's laws must be declared guilty and surrender. Frightened, the woman asks Rosaline what they are talking about. The girl explains that they told her that her father became interested in gambling and died while fleeing to avoid being caught, and since they found evidence, they must cooperate. Irritated, the woman says she's not asking because she doesn't understand, but because she wants to know what's going on. Rosaline only says that she will stop them and asks her mother to hide with Alphonse. This shocks the matriarch, who says she won't be able to stop the guards alone, but the girl is determined to do her best. Still, the woman worries that they might harm her son before the trial, but Rosaline doesn't listen and asks them both to stay hidden. The girl is determined to handle everything, and if it depends on that mother, she won't be safe at all. Meanwhile, the household servants try to prevent something worse. The butler asks them to wait, saying it would be disrespectful. He asks that at least they wait for the lady to finish preparing, but at that same moment, he is attacked. The guard orders them to eliminate all rebels and capture those who are hiding. Finally, Rosaline arrives, already asking what they think they are doing. The girl enters the scene holding her sword, ready for whatever comes. Seeing her, the guard commander asks if she is Miss Rosaline Crimson. Then he greets her more formally. He introduces himself as the commander of the Blue Knights and says that the Count violated the country's laws by gambling, lowering the nobility, and diminishing the empire's prestige. The commander says that this is equivalent to treason, but the girl says she doesn't know what he's talking about. But he's not convinced, and says they should admit their guilt because resisting like this will only worsen their sins. Rosaline stands firm in her arguments and says that if she doesn't resist here, she'll be admitting her guilt, and asks if that isn't the law of the country. She says they can't capture her as an innocent person when she wasn't involved in her father's gambling. Drawing her sword, she declares that if they want to take her, they'll have a hard time doing it. A shout is heard giving the order. "She's over there! Capture her!" The guards run closer and closer to Rosaline, demanding that she stop. As she runs, the girl makes a daring move. Using her sword to pull the carpet, she makes the guards fall. Rosaline subdues one of them who's on the ground. Clearly afraid, the man begs her not to come closer, even trying to do something in that situation. But fearless, Rosaline uses her sword to stab his hand. Soon after, another guard surprises her from behind and asks how she dares to attack the Blue Knights, even though they were the ones invading her home. But the girl isn't defenseless at all. Rosaline uses her sword for a brief clash. She runs, surrounded by 3 more guards. Even so, she fears nothing and uses her sword to strike them. She gains a great advantage over them. In the end, she knocks down the swords of all 3 and points hers at the one still standing. But to make matters worse, her mother is also caught and calls for her daughter's help. The lady and Alphonse are held hostage by one of the guards. She is terrified, crying for her life and the boys. Rosaline asks if they're really going to use her mother and brother as hostages. The commander says she wouldn't have been threatened if she hadn't resisted. He says she's already lost her father and surely wouldn't want the same to happen to what's left of her family. So the girl asks them not to hurt them. They take some time to tie her up and then throw her violently to the ground. The commander tells her to give up the idea of going to the capital and says she's using something that doesn't even look like a sword. Her hair is grabbed tightly by another guard as he taunts her, asking if earlier she was nervous and now scared, since she doesn't even say a word. Rosaline says that if it weren't for her, he wouldn't be a knight for much longer. In disbelief, he questions her, and the girl says he was lucky that she only injured his wrist, allowing him to leave with his honor intact. With his ego wounded, the man kicks her, telling her to shut up. Rosaline knows one thing. If she goes to the capital, she'll be executed. So she would rather meet her end now than live for that. She wonders why suddenly he stopped kicking. Rosaline tries to see if it's the Empress's knights, and without hearing anything, she forces herself to look up. In front of her stands a tall and handsome man. With him are more men, and the woman has doubts about whether they are the Empress's knights. This is the Grand Duke, and the commander asks what he is doing there, but the Duke counters by asking what they are doing there. Then the commander explains that he is there under the Empress's orders to capture the Crimson Rose family. The Grand Duke then looks at the girl kneeling before him. For Rosaline, that gaze feels like being swept away by the winter wind, and it doesn't seem to belong to someone alive. And she wonders if it's because of the deep blue of his eyes. The Grand Duke asks if that's the reason he destroyed the mansion, but the commander says he did it to capture those who are hiding. He says it doesn't seem like a person could hide behind a picture frame or a vase. That leaves the guard too nervous to say anything. Then the Grand Duke says they should return to the mansion and find those who are hiding, declaring that he will take the girl with him. But the commander tries to stop him, saying it's difficult because he has an order from Her Majesty the Empress not to hand the criminal over to anyone. The Duke says that His Majesty the Emperor himself told him he could take her. In a slightly threatening tone, he asks if the Empress's orders are above the Emperor's, and even threatens to have his Black Knights search the mansion. And of course, a coward like him would lose his courage at that. The Duke tells his guard Heinz to escort the young lady. He takes her to see the doctor. Meanwhile, the man watches them walk away. At the mansion, the girl is examined, and luckily no bones are broken. But even so, the doctor says it's terrible since the bruises aren't light and gets angry that knights would do such a thing to a lady. On the other hand, Rosaline laments, saying it's a pity that the knight's life had to end like that. Damien asks what happens if she gets too many injuries like this, and if her skin will be left full of scars. He says that in any case, the bruises will soon disappear, and if she takes care of herself properly, there won't be any scars left. Seemingly unconcerned, she says she understands, so the doctor tells her to take it seriously. He says that the human body is precious, and if she doesn't take care of it soon, it won't function well, while her thought is how annoying that actually sounds. Changing the subject, Rosaline asks when the investigator will arrive. Smiling, Damien replies that the Lord will come soon. He stands up, greets her, and says he has to leave. But in her mind, she wonders why he called the investigator Lord, making her think that perhaps someone important is coming. Thinking about it, she realizes this isn't the dark interrogation room they usually use. After all, it's a place sealed off in all directions. Either way, she's in a situation where she's being accused of a serious crime, and she wonders if they can really treat her like this. Then someone enters, calling her by name, and she recognizes that voice. It's His Excellency, and suspicious. She wants to know why the Grand Duke of Postenmeyer is there. She even thinks he might be the one to interrogate her. Pulling her out of her thoughts, the man asks if she is Rosaline Crimson Rose. The girl confirms, and he asks if she recognizes him. Rosaline says she heard the others call him Your Highness, while he wants her to confirm that she's 18 years old and that her family relations are her mother and her 6-year-old brother. Then she confirms that information as well. The two are seated, and on the table is a tea set. The Duke asks why she has only one younger brother. This question leaves the girl completely confused. The Grand Duke asks if she has any older sisters or even a cousin who looks like her, which the girl denies. He insists, asking if she has any distant relative who resembles her, at least a woman about 10 years older. Confused, Rosaline explains that she has no interaction with the outside world, and that pink hair and green eyes are symbols of the Crimson Rose family. The Grand Duke denies it as he stands up from the chair. Rosaline wants to know what those questions have to do with her father's gambling accusations. That seems to remind him of the reason he's there, so he says they should talk about that. He reads the paper containing the details of the acts she committed and discovers that the girl injured about 20 of Her Majesty's knights, and that, according to the knights' testimony, she only cut the tendons of their wrists as if it were nothing. Rosaline says it was for self-defense, and the Grand Duke asks, "For your own defense?" She says she committed no crime, but since they tried to arrest her, she had no choice but to resist and prove her innocence. And she says that's also written in the law books. While he replies that things don't always go according to the law, analyzing everything, he says that the girl holds no other position, has never received a knight's title, and there's no record that she ever participated in any fencing tournament, which makes no sense for someone to demonstrate such skills against elite knights. Rosaline keeps defending it as the truth, and he says that doesn't mean people will believe it. The Grand Duke says that it will be concluded that there were other accidents in which several Blue Knights were injured, and because of that, they will not press charges against her. He says that even for an experienced swordsman, it's difficult to cut tendons by aiming only at the hand holding the sword. Then Rosaline asks if that's difficult even for the Grand Duke. He then asks if she wants him to add that accusation, and the girl says she takes responsibility for what she did and that she's innocent of what she didn't do. The Grand Duke says that's not a very smart decision, and he asks if she knows why His Majesty's knights were there. He continues, saying they found evidence of her father's gambling and that the family was accused because of it, that the Empress must have suggested to the Emperor to send the knights, and that maybe she had her own reason to want to handle the situation. And that's why the knights destroyed the mansion, which makes Rosaline remember that it seemed like they were searching for something more than just the family members. The Duke asks if she has any idea what that might be, but she denies knowing anything. He tells her to think more about it, saying he'll do the same, leaving the girl confused. The man warns her not to even think about leaving on her own until she's thought of something. Completely frozen by that, Rosaline can only express a, "What?" With nothing else to say, the Duke leaves the room and is immediately approached by Heinz. He reports that His Majesty's younger brother, Count Weigelhofen, has come for a visit. Meanwhile, in the room, Rosaline thinks that in the end, this was what they were after. A short and stout man greets Melchior but quickly corrects himself, addressing him as Archduke Postenmeier. He apologizes for showing up without notice but says it's an urgent matter. The Duke says that if he came so suddenly, he figured there must be a special reason. Looking nervous, His Majesty's brother gives an awkward laugh and says he's glad to be understood. He says he heard that the man is protecting the daughter of Count Crimson Rose, who lost his title, and because of that, she is nothing. Plus, her father's crime was proven. Therefore, he would like the girl to be handed over, but Melchior doesn't know what to say. Weigelhofen then asks why the Archduke would need to do such an inconvenient job as an interrogation. But the man says Rosaline is injured, and that's why he's protecting her, and also wants to know why the Lesser Duke is personally requesting that she be handed over. This leaves Weigelhofen quite nervous and with a strange expression. Weigelhofen tries to say there's nothing more to uncover, so it's best not to waste time and send her to prison. But for Melchior, there's still a long way to go, leaving His Majesty's brother confused since the Count had escaped. The truth is that he didn't die in an accident, but was actually killed inside his carriage. Melchior says he's seen cases where gamblers who lose are driven to commit crimes, but he finds it strange that something happened so soon with the Count, and he doesn't want to give up someone from the family who could be an important lead. But the Lesser Duke says that this matter isn't his to decide and that the judge will handle it. The Archduke says that as the Lord of Postenmeier, he has the responsibility to protect members of his family, so he can't hand her over without proof. In shock over what he heard, Weigelhofen asks what he means by referring to members of his family. Then Melchior reveals that Rosaline is his wife, leaving His Majesty's brother completely stunned. It's certainly strange for such a famous duke to be married without anyone knowing. Then we return to Rosaline. She's in some kind of vivid dream. Once again, she comes across the same strange clock as usual, and in that same room, she walks. Someone calls her name and she believes it's a child. Rosaline has had this dream many times, but it's the first time she hears another person's voice and she wants to know where she is. This person asks her to wait because they're coming to rescue her, and the girl asks what that means. Desperate, Crimson Rose asks who's there, but she wakes up abruptly from the dream. Shaken, she thinks about the voice she heard for the first time and wants to know who it is. A servant knocks on the door and asks if she needs anything. Apparently, she made some noise, making them think something happened, but the girl explains it was just a dream. Rosaline steps out of her room and asks why His Excellency brought her there. He hasn't returned, and it's been days since the interrogation ended. The doctor asks if she knows her current situation is very dangerous. He tells her that on the first day of her arrival, someone from His Majesty came to ask questions about her, but Melchior made him leave. Rosaline asks if that couldn't affect His Excellency's reputation, and says the man has no reason to help her. And what she has just learned is that this is why he went to see the Emperor. Meanwhile, Melchior greets the Emperor. Balthazar asks if the man knows how much he likes him, and says that if he had said he wanted to marry someone, he would have given permission regardless of who it was. So he asks how the Duke managed to hide this from him, and even got married, especially knowing that a noble marriage alliance requires the Emperor's approval. Melchior begins apologizing and says there was a reason for it, that he and Rosaline had promised to marry, but Count Crimson Rose did not approve. But the Emperor doesn't think that's a good enough reason not to have asked for his permission, asking if it wouldn't have made more sense to request his help. The Duke says he couldn't allow His Majesty to break a national law, and the silver-haired man asks what he means by that. Then Melchior makes the shocking revelation that he couldn't marry a minor without her guardian's authorization. Balthazar asks the girl's age, and he says she's 18 but still quite far from her birthday. The Emperor's eyes sparkle, finding it amazing. Just imagining a love story where one waits for the other, with him promising to wait and even keeping it secret, not to mention protecting her. He sees it as an act of chivalry. Balthazar says he understands the story now, revealing that he thought the Duke would live single for the rest of his life, since he even refused Princess Anastasia's proposal. Melchior apologizes to His Majesty, but the man tells him not to worry about that. He says he's still grateful for when Melchior rescued the Empress 6 years ago, but the Duke says he has no memory of that, and I can already imagine this past becoming an important plot in the story. Even so, Balthazar remains grateful. In any case, Melchior has his permission, and he informs him that he'll proceed with the official marriage procedures. Thus, the Duke departs, leaving the man alone, and the one who seemed too kind, supporting the couple, apparently thinks otherwise, because Balthazar declares that he should have destroyed all the seeds from the beginning. Meanwhile, at the Duke's mansion, Damien says that His Highness doesn't remember his childhood, at least not before becoming an adult, and that he's looking for someone named Roseline. The doctor says that's all he can say and nothing more. That's enough for Rosaline to understand that he's searching for someone who looks like her because of vague memories, and even investigated her. Melchior doesn't know who she is, yet he didn't hand her over and kept her safe there. The girl asks what he expects her to do. Then the Duke himself answers, saying she has to sign. They ask him if everything went well at the audience with the Emperor. Rosaline, however, wants to know what she has to sign. Melchior reveals it's about access to finances, authority, and the marriage vows. This takes his companions by surprise. Immediately, Crimson Rose grabs the contract to read it. It contains authorization from the Emperor himself. Rosaline screams when she reaches the part specifying it's for marriage. The document states that they've been together since spring, and she asks if she's no longer a Crimson Rose. Melchior confirms, explaining that this way she can't be held responsible for her father's crimes, while her mother and brother will only have to pay a fine. He says that the cost of restoring her territory was the loss of the Count title, and everything will be paid by the Postenmeyer family. The girl confronts him, asking if he doesn't find it strange to marry someone he doesn't know, but he justifies it by saying he did it to save her. Meanwhile, Damien whispers to Heinz, asking if he thinks His Excellency is sick. Melchior makes it clear that if she doesn't marry him, the consequence is that she could even die in prison. Rosaline asks if that means he feels sympathy and shows her kindness. Once again, he explains that he only wants to save her, and asks if that reason isn't enough. But everyone in the room still doesn't truly understand his motives. The girl thinks about how difficult it is to arrange a marriage for a noble family, and she believes it must be a fake marriage given the situation she's in. Then something clicks in her mind. She asks if it's because she looks like the person the Archduke is searching for. Melchior only replies that it's nonsense, looking a bit irritated as he stares at the men in the room. Rosaline says it's not the knight's fault. She was only asking questions about what she heard while His Excellency was conducting the investigation. She says that no matter the reason, it would have been better if he had asked her to marry him first. The man says he didn't have time since right after they brought her. A messenger came asking for her to be handed over, but the girl keeps insisting, saying he could have told her afterward. After all, she was locked in her room for a week without knowing anything. Melchior explains that he had to visit the Emperor immediately before anything else could happen. Rosaline thinks that even though he seemed to be thinking about her, in the end, he didn't even bother to let her know. She also knows she doesn't have a better option at the moment, and we can assume that even though he's a stranger, marrying an Archduke might not be so bad. Either way, the girl says she will sign the marriage contract. However, she wants to add one condition. Then she asks that the two of them have a duel. They both prepare for it and go outside. Melchior asks why she wants that. The truth is that she wants to hit him. But what she says is that she's been locked up for a long time and hasn't been able to go out since then. The place was small and tight, and little by little, she was reaching her limit. She asks if now that they're going to be married, wouldn't it be good for them to get to know each other better? And she hopes that this lie will work. Melchior doesn't seem to believe it much, but tells her to do as she wishes. And Rosaline realizes that this isn't just permission, it's respect for her. She thanks His Excellency for accepting. He then asks that from now on, his future wife call him by his name. Without dramatizing it, the girl simply agrees and calls him to the duel. Rosaline then prepares, charging toward him. She's only a few inches away with her sword pointed to strike him, but Melchior manages to block it using his own sword, which surprises her because he hasn't even unsheathed it. Rosaline pushes herself backward to gain distance. She thought that because of his size, he would only push her back with his strength. However, instead of drawing his sword, he purposely moves it so that his blade flows in one direction, and if she hadn't dodged quickly, she would have been caught. Melchior taunts her, saying he thought she was stronger. She then asks if he really won't regret saying that. First, Rosaline lowers her blade toward the ground. Then she crouches and warns that this is going to hurt a little. Then, unexpectedly, she leaps high. Even the Archduke himself is caught off guard, and his companions who are watching the duel are equally astonished. They shout for their lord at that moment. Melchior's sword hits the ground, and a piece of clothing stained with vital fluid falls like a feather. However, the girl is suspended in midair, held by his strong arms. Even Rosaline is shocked by this. Meanwhile, Melchior apologizes for something she has no idea about. With a look filled with emotion, he says that it's exactly the same. She asks him to let her go, worried about the state of his shoulder. But the man only asks who taught her fencing, since her skill is identical to Roselyn's. The Archduke asks her to think again, and that she must have met the woman he's looking for. But the only thing that comes out of the girl's mouth is her question about whether he's still saying that. Desperate, the man talks about their similar abilities, while Rosaline reveals that it was something she learned by herself, which leaves him very surprised. Still in his arms, Rosaline yells for him to let her go. Then finally, the Archduke releases her. Rosaline asks Damien to heal Melchior. Turning away without looking at him, the girl says she's leaving first and asks that the man make sure to receive treatment. Rosaline then leaves him there and walks toward an area of the mansion's garden where roses are cultivated. She takes that moment to reflect on where everything went wrong and also wonders how she could be happy in a place where she doesn't belong. She even wishes that all of this were just a dream, instead of running through a life with a twisted path. Suddenly, something catches her attention. The place seems to have opened a new path, but she was sure there was only one direction before. Following this new path, she wonders where she is. The girl walks deeper into the area. Apparently, she's heading toward the roses, unaware that the mansion was this large. She wonders if she should keep walking and thinks that either way they'll find her, whether she leaves or they come looking. Suddenly, a voice yells for whatever is happening to stop. Looking around in fear, the girl wants to know if someone is fighting nearby. In the forest, a small conflict between students is taking place. The red-haired boy explains that all the other boy needs to do is steal the answer sheets from the lab. The blonde says no one would suspect him since he's always in the professor's laboratory. Then the gang leader asks why he wants to solve the exam questions beforehand. After all, there's no way he'd get good grades otherwise. Finally, the boy gathers courage and says he can't do it. That makes them laugh as if it were a joke. The big guy grabs his clothes, saying, "I thought you were smart, but it seems you're not," and asks why he doesn't listen politely. Raising his fist, he asks if he's doing this because he wants a beating. Without answering the insult, the boy closes his eyes, preparing himself for what's coming. But just as the bully is about to do what he promised, something hits his hand, leaving everyone confused and wondering who's there. This time, the blonde gets hit on the head. They panic, trying to figure out where those things are coming from, unaware that it's Rosaline hiding behind a tree. The leader yells for them to catch whoever is doing that, promising to kick that person. Another stone comes flying in his direction, but this one hits the tree behind him. The boys are startled to see the stone stuck there, realizing it was a warning from whoever was doing it. As he runs away, the leader says they'll let him go for today. Finally free, the boy stands up. He then thanks the one who helped him, showing that he's aware of where his savior is. He says he would like to meet her in person to thank her, and asks that if everything is fine, she should take a step forward. Rosaline is impressed because she intentionally changed her position and threw the stones. And even so, he still knew where she was. Besides that, there were many trees blocking the view. Finally revealing herself, she asks if he's hurt. The boy, who she thought looked a lot like the Archduke, thanks her for the help since, thanks to her, they didn't do anything to him. Rosaline says it's nothing, but it's a bit strange seeing so many people bothering one person. She scared off the bullies because she didn't want to see that, but she admits it feels nice to be thanked. The boy says it's only right to thank someone when they've helped you. He introduces himself as Julian, a third-year student at the Imperial Academy, and asks if he can know the name of his benefactor. This surprises Rosaline, who feels she hasn't done much, yet still feels embarrassed. The question puts her in conflict, wondering if it's okay to say her name, knowing that without the surname, he won't know who she is. She concludes it's better to tell the truth than to lie for no reason and seem suspicious. Rosaline finally introduces herself to him. Julian is delighted to know the name of his benefactor, but Crimson Rose can't take it anymore and asks him not to use that word again. The boy thanks her once more and asks her to call him by his name. He says she can ask for help anytime if she ever needs it since he'd like to repay the favor. He adds, a bit disheartened, that there's very little he can do, but what he really means is that a lonely heart isn't a good thing. Rosaline finds him to be a good boy, and is surprised that he's so kind and thoughtful toward others when he's just a child, wishing that he'll grow up without being bullied. Julian says he has to go and asks her to take care of herself. The woman also needs to return soon. Since he's heading toward the academy, she only needs to go in the opposite direction to reach Postenmeyer Mansion, so she follows the path. Walking there, she soon arrives at the field she saw when she first entered the mansion, happy to have found the right way. She then goes inside. Already in the inner area, Rosaline wonders if Melchior is okay. Distracted by this thought, she only notices someone there when she closes the door. The Archduke tells her she's late. Rosaline asks about his wound, but the man replies that it's not something she needs to worry about, claiming it's not deep and that it's healing quickly. The girl apologizes for causing it, but Melchior questions why she's apologizing for that. Rosaline says it was an understandable situation, but believes she acted very childishly. After all, she knows that even though the Archduke decided everything on his own, in the end, she received his help. However, instead of thanking him, she asked for a duel and even injured him. So the girl wonders how he could be fine after being stabbed and thinks she should behave more like an adult. Rosaline finally thanks him for what he did and says that, as promised, she will sign the contract and asks if he wants anything else from her. But Melchior says he has nothing in mind. Still, a little disappointed, she wonders whether he just won't say it or really has no idea. Even so, it's interesting to her. Rosaline signs the contract and thinks about how this simple paper will change her entire situation. This time, she believes she's going to live a good life, so she can help the Archduke's family with her own strength. That's the wish they both share, to work hard together in the future. And she'll really need to do that, because her husband paid a 70 million fine because of her family. The sun is already setting. With all the marriage matters settled and the couple gone, only the two men remain as Heinz organizes the documents. It's Damien who breaks the silence, asking what they just heard, saying he might be crazy but dares to ask if His Excellency is really going to marry Crimson Rose. The blonde simply confirms. The doctor says he's so shocked that his legs feel weak since the Archduke once even refused the princess's proposal and is now suddenly getting married. But Heinz replies that it wasn't sudden, because rumors say the marriage had already been discussed before, though Damien still insists that's a lie. Wanting to keep it as truth, Heinz says that's common, especially among nobles, advising that it's better not to make inappropriate comments. After all, Rosaline is no longer just a young lady, but someone of higher status now. The next day, the new lady goes to her husband to tell him she wants to learn how to manage the family's finances. Melchior says that if it's about the business, she should specify exactly what she wants to learn. Then she says she wants to learn everything a hostess should know. I can't help but wonder how her relationship with her mother will be after this marriage. Returning to the Archduke, he simply replies that she can do as she wishes. Disappointed, the girl, who expected something more, asks whom she should learn from. Melchior says there's no need to look for anyone since she can do as she sees fit, because the basic education from the academy on how to be a hostess is already sufficient. A bit uncertain, Rosaline justifies it by saying it's only theoretical knowledge, as she hasn't had any practical experience during this time. Melchior explains that it's something one learns along the way. She can start however she thinks is best, and if a problem arises, she can come up with a plan for it. Rosaline concludes that this means she will have to go through trial and error. She says that it doesn't matter if it's the Postenmeier archducal family, because even they have limits, and if she makes a serious mistake. However, the Archduke himself assures her that some mistakes won't easily ruin the family. The girl understands that. After all, she is the wife of a very powerful man. But Rosaline sees it as necessary to learn everything thoroughly, so she won't have flaws like the Crimson Rose family did. The Postenmeiers are a family full of prestige, with many other families loyal to the Archduke instead of the Emperor, capable of growing stronger over time, so she can make mistakes and fail. Melchior assures her that the position of Archduchess will be a strong support for her duties and that she can try again until she succeeds. The reason Postenmeier's vassals are so loyal is probably because of this kind of pride. Rosaline believes that to be recognized in such a famous family, Melchior must have made a great effort. She feels that being strong isn't enough, and this makes her wonder if he has also failed before, and who stood by his side when that happened. A bit hesitant, she calls her husband's name, asking if he's still searching for that person who looks like her, even sharing a similar name. Melchior briefly denies it, but his reaction changes when Rosaline asks why, and says that it's because she was his first love. The Archduke denies that it's anything like that, but she insists, asking if he truly doesn't have feelings for her. Then he says that Rosaline was his mentor. To Crimson Rose, that sounds like a lie, because just seeing her skill with a sword made his eyes light up. So she believes Rosaline wasn't just an important friend, and for some reason, that makes her feel strange. Melchior calls her by her name, making it clear he's not referring to someone else. It's also confusing that Crimson Rose suggests it might be better to change her name, even to give herself a nickname, which I agree with, since even though the spelling differs slightly, the pronunciation is the same. Rosaline then looks at him, waiting for him to say something, but Melchior remains thoughtful, not even showing whether he liked the idea or not, making her think it was a pointless suggestion, and that the man married her only because she resembles the person from his memories. She feels like a replacement, and therefore believes it's her name that should change. Finally, Melchior says something, naming the other one Roslyn. But Crimson Rose points out that even names can sound the same in the Eastern pronunciation. Melchior says that in any case, Roslyn isn't who she thinks, insisting that she was his benefactor and that he only seeks to repay a favor. Rosaline still feels he's denying something, though it's only a guess. Even so, she can't help but find the coincidence between their names strange. Not long after, at the imperial residence, things are far from pleasant. The Empress talks about the Archduke's marriage to Crimson Rose, which had the Emperor's approval. Desperate, her brother asks how that could have happened. The two men say they couldn't get any information from the Countess or her son, nor did they find anything in the mansion. Wilhelmina declares that what remains is Rosaline, yet she was taken away by the Archduke. It seems the woman is plotting something, as he had suspected from the beginning. Weigelhofen asks his sister what they should do, trembling at the thought that for some reason power won't return after the Count's death. This only irritates her, making the Empress order him to shut up, saying her head hurts because of him. She says he's utterly useless. Right after Count Crimson Rose's death, evidence was presented of his involvement in gambling, and the possibility of the case becoming more complicated is low. The problem for the Empress is that she hasn't been able to recover the power His Majesty once granted her. So Wilhelmina thought that with the Count's death it would return, but it seems nothing has changed. She believes it was passed down to his successor. It was His Majesty who granted it after taking care of him. However, she wonders how he can say he lost it in a bet. Back to Crimson Rose. The girl analyzes all the family's business records, grateful that the family logs were written separately. This should give her an idea of how to manage things. She even thought there wouldn't be any records since it's the only mansion in the capital. It's while going through these books that she discovers Melchior comes from a secondary bloodline. He became the head of the family through a succession competition, taking a year to inherit the title, which she thinks is shorter than most. His parents died when he was young, forcing him to live in the academy dormitory without any kind of care. Rosaline realizes that they both went through similar times, and she believes that's why he understands her feelings. She understands that in that situation, meeting a friend or mentor becomes something precious. Then she wonders how someone in the Archduke's position hasn't been able to find her, which makes her think the woman must be dead. And once again, she feels like she's the reason for this marriage. For Rosaline, there's no point thinking about it, since it's not as if they married for love. That's why she doesn't think it's necessary to investigate Melchior's past, and even if he had a romantic affair, there's no reason to be jealous. Suddenly, she's interrupted by the announcement that her mother and brother have arrived, demanding the Archduchess's presence, which surprises her. Arriving at the guest room, Rosaline is greeted by her relatives. Her mother immediately starts chattering about how they were saved by the Archduke. She even makes it clear how surprised she is that their family was accepted as his wife's family, saying it's an incredible stroke of luck. The Countess says that her daughter is now an Archduchess, making her believe that miracles truly exist. That's not very pleasant for Rosaline, but she only replies that she didn't expect her mother to be so happy. After all, her mother believes that by being the Archduke of Postenmeyer's mother-in-law, no one will dare to look down on the Crimson Rose family. In reality, they are more like the Postenmeyer's subordinates. Rosaline knows that, in the real world, everyone will laugh and say they were simply lucky. The Countess comments on the promise of full support to manage the territory and the mansion until Alphonse becomes an adult. Rosaline says that, in any case, it's a great debt. She says it's not as if the Archduke would offer such support so easily, and that even if they worked their whole lives, they wouldn't be able to repay it. Arrogantly, her mother laughs as if it were a joke and says that's why they should live with grateful hearts. Rosaline proposes doing something to repay part of the money spent, but the Countess thinks that someone as wealthy as the Archduke wouldn't even notice something so small, and that even if they spent their entire lives just enjoying themselves, it would never run out. Rosaline asks if that's why she thinks it's fine to waste it, and even little Alphonse wants to hear the answer. Feeling deeply offended, the Countess asks how she dares to speak that way in front of her own mother. She asks if the girl has gone mad because her father isn't around, and mocks her, saying that now that she's an Archduchess, she's ignoring the Countess of Crimson Rose. Out of patience for all that drama, Rosaline simply replies that it's not like that. But irritated, her mother continues insulting her, asking if the girl ever even looked for her all this time and what she was doing. She accuses her, saying that while they were suffering, her daughter was happily meeting a man. The woman says that even at the mansion, she caused chaos and abandoned them, that nothing has changed, and asks if she isn't ashamed to be the older sister. Rosaline fires back, saying she doesn't want to be a life example for Alphonse, and raising her voice, the woman accuses the Archduke of marrying her for only one reason: The Countess says the reason is that the girl remained pure and unmarried, that their hardships turned into blessings, and that's why she forgave her, revealing that she purposely gave her a warm welcome so things would go well between them, but calls the girl selfish. Trembling, Rosaline wonders what kind of mother this is. She never paid her any attention since the day she was born, even pretending to forget her debut, though she had been looking forward to it. Rosaline knows nothing about the social world, not even being able to attend friends' parties because she had no money, making her think she would end up alone. And even regarding the strict education for succession, the woman never defended her once. As soon as her brother was born, everything seemed so natural, and everything Rosaline ever tried to achieve was given entirely to Alphonse. No one ever once looked back to see how she felt. Then Rosaline finally responds that at last her mother considers her part of the family, and that wouldn't be the case if Alphonse were not still a child. That only angers the woman more, who asks why she's even bringing him up, and even questions if she's just like him, until the girl tells her the truth, reminding her that she's her daughter too. The mother calls her arrogant, saying she raised her, and asks if she regrets living this way. Rosaline states that she truly does regret it, and should have said it earlier. As Alphonse's older sister, she'll take responsibility and care for him so he can live comfortably in this mansion, and says that since she doesn't seem to be her mother's daughter, she has no reason at all to take care of the woman. The Countess is about to hurl more insults, but Rosaline makes it clear that as the Postenmeyer hostess, she has the right to decide what happens in the residence. Pointing to the door, the girl demands that she leave. Meanwhile, her husband is once again with the Emperor, who asks if it's difficult to hold a ceremony because they're in mourning. Melchior explains that he can't ignore his wife's feelings, even if they can't hold a funeral. Balthazar comments that it must be hard for the Archduchess to have lost her father, and he smiles, saying that Melchior has grown up knowing how to respect the feelings of others, saying that he understands how he feels. Even so, the Emperor says that if they aren't going to celebrate, there's no reason he rushed to approve the marriage. They should do something, even if it's simple. Melchior then agrees with His Majesty. He returns to his mansion much later, walking through the long corridor illuminated by the light coming from outside. Meanwhile, he plans to do something quickly, and for that, all he needs is to summon a priest. Because since the Empress still has Rosaline as her target, he wants it to be as discreet as possible. Something makes Melchior stop halfway down the hall. That something, or rather, someone, is Rosaline. The girl turns around and looks at him. Melchior also gazes back at her, his eyes filled with emotion. Now that they're closer, the two can look at each other more clearly. The Archduke asks what she's doing there. With a sad look, Rosaline replies that she was just thinking about escaping during the night, making him question her for doing that right after signing their marriage vows. Rosaline says she's only joking, admitting that she just wanted to take a walk to get some fresh air. Melchior says that the moonlight is bright, but it's still too dark to walk alone and offers to accompany her. Taking a closer look at her, the Archduke notices her red eyes and asks if something happened. Rosaline averts her gaze and tells him to just ignore it, but that's not something he can ignore. Melchior says he can't do that because he's her husband. That manages to bring a small smile to his wife's face. A marriage made by contract to avoid punishment had made her think it was something fake, that she was only a substitute. But Rosaline feels comforted when the Archduke refers to himself as her husband. They go to the garden, and Melchior explains that since he only stays at the mansion occasionally, the place isn't well maintained, so he asks her to hire a gardener. Melchior then calls her attention, saying there's something he needs to discuss about the wedding. He tells her that the Emperor said they should hold a ceremony, even a simple one, because he considers it a special event. Concerned, Rosaline asks how big it's going to be. The Archduke explains that they only need the basics, just to summon a priest, and remembering her family, he suggests that she also invite her friends. Rosaline appears confident when confirming her family's presence there. However, it's impossible to hide the trembling in her body as she speaks. Melchior doesn't miss that, thinking she's irritated at the idea of having a wedding ceremony. He also wonders if she's disappointed because she changed her mind. The Archduke says that if she doesn't want to, they won't do it, suggesting he can talk to His Majesty again. What happened in the morning still bothers her, but she nevertheless agrees to go along with it. Changing the subject, Rosaline asks about his injury. He seems to have forgotten about it, but the girl reminds him of what happened while they were training. I must say, the illustration of this scene is stunning, both in line work and lighting. The night atmosphere is beautifully done. Back to Melchior, he replies that it was nothing, though he really just wants to say he's fine because it doesn't interfere with his work. But Rosaline interprets it as him saying it's just an ability that's not special at all, so she says it's no big deal, making the Archduke wonder if he did something wrong. In reality, it was a serious injury, but he has strong endurance and heals quickly, so it won't cause major problems. Still, For some reason, he feels as though he's made a grave mistake, and he's worried about how quiet the girl is while they're walking. Melchior thinks maybe she's upset with him, wondering if it's because he took too long to bring her mother and brother. He wonders even more if it's because he comes home late every day, or because there aren't enough servants, or if something else is bothering her. The Archduke wants to know what he should say to her. Now that he's stopped to think, he realizes they've been walking for quite a while and wonders if he should give her his coat. But Melchior regrets that it isn't very cold, and worries what might happen if her mood worsens. He tries to think logically, but he really doesn't know what to do when he's alone with a woman. Finally, Rosaline breaks the silence between them. She asks if they can go back to the mansion since it's already late. Melchior agrees, though still unsure why. Rosaline, on the other hand, reflects on how the conversation didn't go anywhere, not even once during this short walk. The Archduke, seeing her so quiet and distant, didn't know what to do, so he thought it would be more comfortable to just walk together without talking. Even though he agreed to go on the walk, he wonders if it's too much already, and has no idea what she's thinking. Rosaline doesn't seem to find the situation pleasant, making the man question whether he'll really be able to make this marriage work. At the imperial residence, Balthazar knocks on the door of the chamber, asking Wilhelmina if she's not going to open it, but she doesn't. The emperor tries his best, saying it's summer, the air is thin, and asks her not to forget that he's old now, and that he doesn't know if his body can endure for much longer. Wilhelmina opens the door just a crack. She tells His Majesty that she doesn't know either. Balthazar enters the room and asks his wife to forgive him. The Empress accepts that, and also asks him not to laugh, but the man says he can't help it when he sees his beautiful wife. Looking tired, Wilhelmina sits down. It doesn't take long for the Emperor to do the same. She asks why he sat beside her, demanding that he stay in front of her instead. Balthazar explains that he breathed in too much night air, making his body cold, and that's why he needs her warmth. But the Empress demands that he sit on the other side, even threatening to throw him out. He asks if she's still angry about him freeing the Crimson Rose family. Wilhelmina asks why she would be upset with His Majesty's wishes, though her reaction clearly shows otherwise. The Emperor makes it clear that if she needs anything, she should tell him, but his wife says it's not like that. Turning toward her and holding her hand, the man says, "You're all I have," and that he would even give his life for her. Kissing her hand, he declares that whatever she desires, he'll make it happen. Back at the Archduke's mansion, Rosaline is sitting down, and it's clear from her expression that she's tired because she hasn't been able to sleep, too busy with work. The butler enters her office. He's come to inform her that the Countess of Crimson Rose wishes to see her, but Rosaline asks him to tell her that she doesn't wish to do the same. The man tries to argue, but the girl stops him, saying that what she gave her mother should be enough to prevent any inconvenience. And she adds that once the Crimson Rose mansion is returned, it will be better for her to go back there. Hugo seems a bit uncomfortable with all of this, which makes Rosaline want to know what's wrong. She believes it might be because she expelled her own mother, though she knows that if it were Melchior, the man wouldn't have said a word. Rosaline asks the butler if there was a recruitment for new servants the previous day. Hugo confirms, and the Archduchess immediately asks why she wasn't allowed to choose the staff herself. Catching the butler off guard with that question, Rosaline asks him to bring all the identification documents and letters of recommendation. The papers are brought and placed on her desk. Rosaline takes a good look at them, noticing that all the records are impeccable. Hugo says that anyone without an identification document or letter of recommendation, no matter how much they try, is never hired. The Archduchess does something bold. She picks up 3 files and orders those people to be dismissed, leaving the butler completely stunned. Hugo says that's impossible since they've already signed their employment contracts with the family and have even started working. Rosaline asks who they signed the contracts with. After all, she's the hostess of Postenmeyer. She says that it's good they've already started working and then asks him to call the 3 so she can dismiss them personally. The butler asks her for the reason behind this. Then Rosaline explains that the western branch of the Chamber of Commerce merged with the southern headquarters in August of last year, meaning Axel, who worked until January, forged his resume. Another one claimed to have crossed a ferry at the end of May, which is also false since all ferry operations were suspended from May to June due to typhoons. Lastly, the person named Laban, who's from the outskirts, said he was a horticulturist in the west in Snowfall. Hugo interrupts her, saying that story is true, because Snowfall, where he worked, has a service history with their family. Smiling, Rosaline says the person's story is real, so there's no need to confirm it, and that the place used to be Crimson Rose property. She says they lost it 3 years ago after a manager deceived her father and that she didn't know the man's family was involved with Snowfall. Rosaline says that when that happened, all business relations ended, so she has no intention of getting involved with them again. Finally, she explains her reasoning for dismissing those 3. She hands the documents to the butler and asks him to contact them. Hugo accepts the Archduchess's order, Before he leaves, Rosaline calls him back to inform him that when hiring new employees in the future, he must make sure to come to her first and ask for permission. The butler bows properly. After some time, Rosaline decides to leave her office. She reflects that all the servants are doing a good job, yet she notices something odd, like the maid who came to clean her room the other day and asked her to step out. They're efficient but seem to respect their master too much, and the girl wonders if it's because of Melchior. Suddenly, something catches her attention. It's Alphonse standing there, and she wants to know why. The boy immediately tells her something. Rosaline finds it strange that he's up so early and asks if he came to see her. Her little brother says nothing, seeming afraid of something. Alphonse asks to go to the bathroom. He's 6 years old enough to go on his own, but the Archduchess thinks he might be feeling uneasy in the mansion. Rosaline also believes that after seeing her expel their mother, he might be more frightened and nervous, making it hard for him to handle everything, so she says she'll take him. Alphonse immediately clings to his sister but still seems scared of something. He looks around, making sure no one is nearby. Then he makes Rosaline stop and whispers that he doesn't want to go to the bathroom. For his age, he seems very smart. Alphonse tells her that the day before, he heard the house servant speaking badly about his sister, which leaves Rosaline very uneasy. Alphonse explains that during the night he was afraid to sleep alone, so he wandered down the hallway, thinking about how his sister had expelled their mother and how he had never seen her that angry before. That's why he decided he would go look for the Countess. That was when he overheard the maids talking about how His Excellency had married a young lady from such a poor family, and they made it clear that they weren't even aristocrats anymore after losing their title. One of them laughed, saying they were a family of criminals and troublemakers, with the daughter going as far as to throw her own mother out. Another said that Rosaline had refused to be the main lady and came to this region instead, and that she couldn't believe the Archduke accepted someone like that. Then one of them asked what would happen if they accidentally did something to embarrass Rosaline. Hearing all this leaves the girl completely shocked. Meanwhile, the Archduke is also working, taking a short break to drink his tea. He asks Heinz if he isn't eating. The blonde man confirms, saying he can't manage to. Melchior looks at him and asks since when he started worrying about that. Noticing his face looks thinner, Heinz declares that he's going to die. Even more concerned, the Archduke asks if he had breakfast, and the man says he had a light meal on the first floor of the knight's headquarters. Then he asks if he couldn't sleep. But with his weary appearance, the commander says he slept for 8 hours. Melchior understands that at least he slept enough, so he wants to know what the problem is. Heinz says that apparently he's depressed. The blonde man asks if he can take a medical leave because he wants to see Benjamin, and the Archduke has no idea who that is, until it's revealed that Benjamin is the knight's lover, left behind in the East. Melchior can't even hide his expression, but to crush everyone's expectations, Benjamin turns out to be a 2-year-old rubber tree plant. The Archduke says that 2 months after the wedding, they'll be heading east, and asks why he's worried about that. After all, in the meantime, someone else will take care of it. And Heinz, startled, asks what His Excellency means. The commander laments that it's already been 6 months since he last saw Benjamin, and worries that in these 2 months someone might take him away. Melchior asks him not to get tears on the documents, and even suggests that if he feels lonely, he could buy the same plant and raise it here. Heinz gets flustered, asking if that's a suggestion to have 2 lovers, and coming from a newly married man no less. He asks what His Excellency would say if the Archduchess invited a man to live as her concubine. With a completely serious tone, Melchior asks what he just said, and Heinz immediately claims it was nothing. Either way, the Archduke tells him to go see Benjamin, and Heinz asks if he's giving him vacation time. Melchior denies it. It simply means the man will resign and leave. Heinz cries over His Excellency's lack of compassion. Meanwhile, the Archduke wonders what Rosaline must be doing at that moment and intends to talk with her when he returns. He arrives late as usual and is greeted by the butler, who mentions something about Rosaline and the Countess. Whatever it is, Hugo merely confirms what he said. The Archduke's only response is a simple, "All right." He removes his coat and hands it to the man. Melchior notices that the butler still seems uneasy, so he tells him that if he has something to say, he should say it. Then Hugo asks if he's truly fine with it. After all, the woman is still her mother. The Archduke says that if Rosaline acted that way, she must have had a reason, and he even asks the man whether it wasn't for a good reason that the Countess of Crimson Rose was expelled. Hugo talks about the Archduchess's reputation, especially if she treats her own mother like that. With a stern look, Melchior asks, what about her reputation? Showing that he won't tolerate any disrespect toward his wife, he asks who the man thinks he is to question Rosaline's reputation. Hugo defends himself, saying he's not questioning it, only speaking of the possibility, but the Archduke tells him to let his wife do whatever she wants, which greatly offends the man. But he lowers his head, accepting His Excellency's order. Melchior leaves, deeply worried, thinking that this must be the reason Rosaline was in a bad mood the previous night, regretting not having paid a bit more attention, as he feels he should have investigated more about her childhood and upbringing. Melchior questions why the butler only mentioned it now and not the day before. Since not knowing anything, he ended up speaking about her family without realizing. It's very late, and he imagines Rosaline must already be asleep. Yet he still wonders if he should suddenly go see her. Melchior walks toward her room and stands still at her door, deep in thought, unsure of what he should do. After a short moment, he decides to open the door, entering the room without even announcing his presence. The Archduke looks around, searching for his wife. He finds her on the balcony, an ethereal figure bathed in moonlight. Rosaline quickly notices his presence. Melchior says it's dangerous to do that, and confused, she asks what happened. The Archduke says he thought she was asleep. That makes her feel sad. Once again, he's talking about something else. Still, she answers that after the wedding, they'll go to the eastern coast. So she was thinking of taking one last look at the capital sky. Taking advantage of the topic, Melchior tries to talk about what to do after the wedding, but he soon notices Rosaline's distant expression. He realizes that maybe for her, her family isn't that kind, so he thinks there's no need to invite them. They can simply have the priest bless the vows and be done with it. Rosaline breaks the silence by calling his name. She starts off a little uncertain, asking how much she resembles Rosaline. Melchior replies that it's enough to confuse the two. Rosaline says she understands, but she seems sad at his answer, perhaps disappointed. She admits that she's been thinking about it these past days, feeling some resentment because he made all the decisions without her consent. But in the end, it was useless, and that in any case, things turned out fine. Rosaline says she's lucky, but still claims that he'll be disappointed. Melchior denies it, saying he won't be disappointed. Smiling faintly, the girl says it's all right, because in the end, the one he's truly looking for is the real Rosaline. Her words hit Melchior like a punch. She continues, saying she knows that all he ever wanted was the real Rosaline. Then Melchior reveals that the truth is, he wants her too, because she's the one he wants to save. The Archduke's gaze carries all the sincerity in his words. Trying to understand Rosaline's current feelings, he realizes they have nothing to do with Rosaline. The girl says he doesn't know anything about her, and yet he's shown her so much kindness. She thinks going that far to help someone you barely know is something extraordinary, so she thanks him for it. Rosaline says she's indebted to him, regretting how she reacted, and promises she'll repay his kindness someday. But Melchior doesn't like the way she says it, as if she only sees his actions as something she must repay. He says there's no need for that. For him, it would have been enough if she had accepted it with joy, and he wonders why she insists on keeping her distance. The Archduke says she won't be able to repay it anyway. That even shocks the girl. He himself regrets saying it, but it's already too late to take it back. Rosaline is unsure of what to say, but in the end, she agrees that he's right, since he has status, power, wealth, and all that. She says she'll do her best not to tarnish his name or the Postenmeier family's. Rosaline tells him not to worry. As long as she's his wife, there will be no dishonor brought upon the family, at least, saying that's the best she can do. Melchior says nothing more. For Rosaline, that level of relationship is enough. She only needs to stay faithful to the contract, since it was never a marriage born from love. Even though she signed the documents as Rosaline Postenmeier and all the servants call her Your Grace, she feels more like a caretaker of the household than a wife. Rosaline says it's fine and suggests they go inside, even asking if he has to work the next day since he must have a lot to do. Melchior confirms, even though he's too nervous because they're holding hands. The girl says she'll walk him to his room. At that moment, he turns as red as a tomato. The Archduke thinks she misunderstood his words, but he can't understand why he's focusing so much on their intertwined hands, unsure of what to say. The two walk together, with him being guided until the man calls out to her. Rosaline stops midway and turns to look at him. Melchior says she's too fast and that he's being dragged along. She apologizes, though she's certain she wasn't walking that quickly. It makes her wonder if he doesn't like holding hands or if he doesn't like her leading. So she lets go of him. However, Melchior takes her hand again, keeping it there. The Archduke asks if she doesn't want to keep holding hands, leaving her surprised, his face obscured by the light, making it impossible for her to clearly see his expression. But the Archduke's gaze is gentle, as is his expression, like a puppy that's just fallen off a cart. Rosaline says she doesn't dislike it, that she was just a little surprised. Melchior says he was surprised too, but asks if it's all right for them to hold hands again. She agrees, though she thinks it might be wrong to do something like this when he already has someone he loves. It was unexpected. She thought the Archduke was a cold person, and even believed his body temperature would be low. But now she can actually feel how warm his hands are. They're larger than hers, with long fingers. She isn't sure if it's because of his smooth skin, but they don't feel rough at all. As she touches them more, she notices that his hands clearly belong to someone who's wielded a sword for a long time. She can feel calluses similar to her own. Melchior finally breaks the silence and says they were talking about holding hands. At that moment, both of them blush deeply from that small contact. Rosaline tries to understand the sudden situation. She asks if he usually holds hands like this, and the Archduke asks if she didn't like it. The girl quickly denies it, but asks if it's not a little uncomfortable, which he also denies. Rosaline still wonders if he's fine holding anyone's hand. She even gets startled, thinking he might be a more lustful man than she imagined. Thinking that makes her nervous, so she asks if, even though it's a contract marriage, they're still required to fulfill the marital duties as well. Melchior doesn't quite understand the question. He assumes she means making public appearances together, or perhaps she's asking about using the Postenmeier surname. So he says that of course they should fulfill their duties. Confused by that answer, Rosaline asks if he wouldn't feel upset doing that with someone who only looks alike. Melchior doesn't understand why he would be upset, and like before, he feels as though he's missing something about her emotions. Rosaline steps back, asking him to wait. Without realizing the misunderstanding, Melchior asks why she's acting that way. In her attempt to back away, Rosaline loses her balance, causing both of them to fall to the ground. Concerned, the Archduke asks if she's all right. She's so nervous that she can barely speak. Rosaline thinks about how they haven't even had the wedding ceremony yet, and wonders why something like this would happen so suddenly without any preparation. She's so startled she can't even organize her thoughts. Melchior is also nervous about the situation and thinks of getting up quickly. He looks at his hand, still entwined with hers, which makes the moment even more awkward. The two stare at each other for a while. Everything is silent until Rosaline calls out to him. The contact breaks when the man stands up, realizing what he's doing. Rosaline seems offended and says she already figured he didn't like it. After all, she's not the real Rosaline. Melchior tries to explain, but she doesn't let him speak, saying she understands and that he's right. Then the girl tells him to go back to his room since he has to work the next day. The Archduke tries to ask her to wait, but he's already being pushed out. Rosaline wishes him goodnight and slams the door in his face. Melchior wonders where he went wrong. He only wanted to make sure she'd sleep well. He asks himself why he even held her hand, which then caused her to trip and fall. The Archduke concludes that he must be insane. Now he deeply regrets his actions, thinking that what he did must have embarrassed her. The next day, Rosaline finds herself facing a pile of luxurious gifts. Hugo explains that they're all presents sent to her by the imperial family to celebrate the marriage, and that they've informed him more will arrive the next day. Rosaline wonders what to do. The wedding was supposed to be simple, but with this amount, they could even fund the ceremony with the jewels and money alone. She asks Hugo if he can make a map of the capital for her, and says that, if possible, it would be good to have detailed markings of all the areas, large enough for her to see everything clearly. Rosaline explores the place, discovering a new garden, and the man explains that it's part of the mountain within the capital, but it had turned into an isolated forest as the city expanded its roads, even placing buildings there. Though after 5 years, it became a garden again. The protagonist notices this, looking around carefully. She thinks about her past, when she had to earn money. Now, as an archduchess, her job is to spend it, so she plans to rent out the garden to use it as a banquet hall. The man reads her name but calls her Rosalina, making her realize he's from the East. Rosaline thinks about how Melchior has always called her by her name naturally, but with a Western accent. Remembering that after the wedding, they'll go east and that she'll have to meet her husband's family, she feels uncertain about whether she'll be able to earn their trust and gain their support as a couple. The girl is so distracted by these worries that she ends up walking off in the wrong direction without the man even noticing. Rosaline isn't very confident about it, but it's too late to say something silly like that. While walking around, she hears the sound of a pair of birds. That catches her attention. Rosaline finally realizes that she's lost and finds it strange because she was certain she was on the right path. Someone comes running toward her. It's that same boy she saved before. Rosaline calls out to Julian and tells him to hide with her. Meanwhile, the group of bullies is searching for him. They find it odd that they can't locate him, and one of them thinks he heard a woman's voice. They have no idea that Julian is right there, being protected by Rosaline. Soon they end up leaving the area. The boy thanks his savior. Curious, she asks if those are the same students who were chasing him last time, but he says they're just classmates he doesn't get along with. Julian thanks her once again and says he'll return to the academy immediately. He turns around and starts walking, which makes the woman notice something. Rosaline realizes he's limping and asks if he hurt his right leg. Julian insists he's fine and that he can go back on his own, but she won't allow it because his foot is swollen, and walking more could make it worse. So she asks him to tell her where he lives so she can take him there. He says that since she's helped him twice already, he can't keep causing her more trouble without at least doing something in return. That's when she acts like an older sister. She scolds him gently, saying he shouldn't talk about returning favors in front of adults, because it's the duty of older people to protect children. There's not much she can do to help, but she decides to try making a splint. The injury isn't too serious, and she recommends applying some ice, saying it should heal in about 3 days. After helping him with that, Rosaline asks if he's being threatened by his classmates, but the boy replies that he can handle it. Julian is very nervous, and the woman asks how he plans to deal with that problem. She warns that if he tries to act tough, he might end up getting beaten by those boys. So Rosaline tells him that he can simply use them. Being more direct, she says that his classmates glare at him with hate and try to intimidate him. So fighting back might be the best solution, since the one who uses strength always wins. She tells him that the next time that group bothers him, he should fight back. Like a good older sister, Rosaline leans in and whispers something for only the boy to hear. Julian, very impressed, asks if he can really do that. And with her confirmation, he feels confident enough to try. He thinks about how fascinating she is, and how her name, meaning Rose, suits her so well, just like her scent. To him, Rosaline seems like a shining flower that always brightens the people around her. As promised, the Archduchess accompanies Julian and asks if he truly doesn't want help, but the proud boy says he can go alone. As they walk, Rosaline begins to worry about how deep the forest is. They've been walking for so long that they should have reached his place by now. She believes that maybe they can find a way out if they just keep following the road. But where is the exit? There doesn't seem to be one. Not wanting to show panic, she asks Julian to take a short break for a while. The forest is larger than what appears on her map. The boy explains that it's because the area is still under development. Rosaline wants to know more about that, but suddenly Julian starts acting strange. That doesn't escape her notice, and she wants to understand why. Someone is approaching them. Rosaline takes a good look at the man. He looks more like Lurch from the Addams Family. That strange man with a dragging voice says he lost his way and asks if he can go with them. Rosaline becomes very frightened, unsure of what exactly this is. But Julian apologizes to her, saying it's his fault, which only leaves her even more confused about the situation. The boy tells the creature that they aren't going in the same direction and that he doesn't know where it's going. Laughing nervously, that strange man insists and asks if he really can't join them. His gaze is empty. He says once again that he's lost and asks if he can't go with them. Rosaline observes everything, noticing how odd his tone of voice is. His speech sounds like that of someone drunk, yet somehow clearer than before. Julian holds her hand, telling her not to worry because the being isn't dangerous. Once again, he tells the Lurch that they're heading in different directions and that they don't know where he's going. He even seems to accept that but continues walking toward them. The boy steps further back, wanting to keep his distance from the thing. Lurch keeps walking, asking to no one in particular where he should go. Rosaline steps in front of the boy, telling him to stay put, but Julian says it's all right, that it's not dangerous. They speak quietly, and the boy explains that Lurch is a spirit that keeps wandering around lost, not knowing where to go or what to do. He says it's been roaming endlessly, and that if anyone feels pity, they should take it with them. Julian says he's just a child and already in a complicated situation, so he thinks being responsible for someone is a difficult task. Lurch asks if he doesn't feel pity for him. Julian replies that it's too complicated. He can't take him just because he feels sorry, because once the spirit attaches itself to someone, it stays bound forever. That way, the spirit will never return to what it once was, and he doesn't want that to happen. With those words, Lurch begins to fade away before their eyes. Amazed, Rosaline asks if it was the boy who did that, but he merely absorbed the spirit's energy, since only someone with sacred power can make a spirit disappear. This conversation makes Rosaline realize that her ex-fiancé had been telling the truth about power and spirits, though she never believed it before. Julian's eyes start glowing, and he covers them with his hand, asking her not to look. Not having seen it clearly, Rosaline is left only with the impression of having seen light in his eyes. Soon the boy recovers and says that, luckily, it didn't take long for Lurch to calm down. That spirit had no defined form, no body, no memories of its life, trapped on Earth, wandering without eternal rest. Regarding his eyes, Julian was only worried that she might get dizzy like others had before, but Rosaline is different. The woman thinks about how Melchior's eyes have that same glow, and how, the first time they looked at each other, it felt like her heart had frozen. She had never thought a person could have eyes like that, and wonders if he might possess the same ability as the student. Rosaline is still worried about Julian, but the boy assures her that his legs are better than before. She doesn't really believe it, since when she made the splint, his leg was swollen and red. She suspects that absorbing a spirit's soul might have healed the wound. Rosaline thanks the boy for being by her side, saying that if it weren't for him, out of fear, she might have agreed to let Lurch follow her. Panicked, Julian apologizes again, saying once more that it's his fault. This behavior reminds Rosaline of herself at his age. always wanting not to be judged for her actions, yet refusing to be thanked. Thinking, acting, handling things alone, as if carrying a heavy burden on his shoulders. She understands that feeling well. After walking for a long time, they finally reach the end of the forest. Julian thanks her for everything and says he'll return to his dormitory. But before leaving, he asks if they can see each other again. Rosaline finds that request strange. It makes the boy blush bright red, and he immediately says he's leaving. The Archduchess doesn't even have a chance to respond before the boy dashes off. In the end, Julian is just acting like a boy his age. She wishes she could have heard his answer if she'd asked whether he was embarrassed. Rosaline continues on her way. The man who was with her and one of the Black Knights eventually spot her. Nicholas says he was worried about her disappearing in the blink of an eye, and she apologizes for making him worry. The knight tells her not to apologize. After all, she returned quickly. That catches Rosaline's attention. She had just gone through a whole adventure and spent a long time lost. She remembers that the entrance she took had led her into a forest, finding that strange. Nicholas asks if she's all right. Rosaline denies having any problem, preferring to believe she's just imagining things. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Palace, the enemies are uneasy, believing that even though they sent gifts, they might not be invited to the wedding. Their fear is that she's discovered their plans, and they know that if it's a private ceremony, they won't be able to disguise themselves as guests. Wilhelmina asks if there's any way to bring Rosaline to the palace before she leaves for the east, since they must verify whether the power of the Count of Crimson Rose was passed on to her. The blonde man beside her has a plan. He leans in and whispers in her ear so that only she can hear. The Empress doesn't mind playing with fire and agrees to the plan. Rosaline is back at the Postenmeyer mansion and is greeted by the servants. She quickly notices something strange. Some of these people she's never seen before, which makes her think that more staff members have been hired. Hugo says there's something she needs to know. He reveals that a fire has occurred. It happened in a building around the area where the property is located. Luckily, it was an old building that wasn't used anymore and was going to be demolished and rebuilt anyway. He assures her it's not a major issue, and that they've been waiting for her since the fire started because they couldn't handle it alone. Rosaline becomes furious that they did nothing except stand there waiting for her. At this point, I'm already suspicious that this is part of the Empress's plan. Hugo says that the first step in such a situation is to inform her of what's happening. Suddenly, the girl stops, finding it strange that everyone is so quiet. After all, a fire is happening, yet they all decided to just wait for her. Something like that shouldn't need her permission. This story is completely bizarre. After all, who would remain that calm while a building is on fire? Without a doubt, they're trying to test her right now. Elsewhere, the Black Knight runs hurriedly. He's extremely alarmed by the news he just heard. Ignoring manners, he bursts through the door and immediately tells his lord that there's an urgent message. Melchior stops everything he's doing. He's informed about the fire at his estate. The Archduke wants to investigate immediately to see how his property is. Heinz holds Eric back, asking the knight to wait. He asks if the information is true and if there are any injuries, but nothing serious has happened other than the fire, which is near the West Building. Eric finds it strange that he's saying it's not a big deal, so the commander explains that he went through the same thing when he joined the Knights. It's a kind of welcome party. Rosaline and the group of servants head to where the fire is happening. The servants are calm even though they started it, which makes her think they have no respect for her. However, she can't waste time being angry. The priority is to put out the fire. Rosaline asks if the firefighters have been called, and Hugo confirms that they have. He says it might be too late by the time they arrive, as the flames could begin to spread. So Rosaline decides to stop that from happening herself. She ignores their shouts, warning her that it's dangerous. Rosaline covers herself from the toxic smoke. It seems the fire started in the kitchen. She has to think about how to deal with it, knowing that she can't throw water if it was caused by oil. Rosaline orders everyone to grab a sack of wheat. Each person pours flour over the fire, and it actually works to fix the problem. After that, the Archduchess tells the butler to check for any remaining embers and to move the burned furniture outside. Hugo didn't expect that, even more so because the girl realized it was a test. It's rare for an 18-year-old to stay calm and find solutions like that. Moreover, she thought of the warehouse next door, which was ideal for finishing off the fire, showing great leadership skills. Rosaline stares at him very suspiciously, and he, in turn, averts his gaze. Apparently, everyone looks impressed. They really were testing her, and she has no choice but to conclude that. The problem is, unfortunately, she has no proof against them. Not to mention they could use the excuse that she told the butler to always seek her approval before acting, and since they called the firefighters, they were just being cautious. The bigger issue is that she has no physical evidence that they tried to test their lady, and if she gets angry, they'll say she's being too sensitive about what happened. Their method went too far. If Rosaline had made the wrong choice, like throwing water on an oil fire, the flames would have spread. Even though it worked out, it doesn't change the fact that they put her in a dangerous position without knowing what consequences it might bring. And it angers her that they get away with it, feeling victorious and proud. Rosaline also wonders if it's really fine for them to neglect their duties like that. From the start, she thought their behavior was odd, like forcing her to leave the room just because they wanted to clean it. The issue is that they're very efficient. No doubt about that. The problem is they have no consideration for her. Rosaline asks the butler how the fire started. Hugo blames a maid for secretly going to the kitchen to make a snack and accidentally spilling oil stored there, which started the tragedy. The girl notices a flaw in his statement. She asks if he's claiming they were cooking there, since it was the man himself who told her that the place was going to be demolished in the winter and was no longer in use. Then she asks about the one responsible for it all. All the servants turn their eyes toward one specific person. They accuse the child of being seen leaving the kitchen. Terrified, the girl stammers that it wasn't her. They surround the child like a pack of vultures, saying they saw her leave her post during the lunch break. They say that if she caused the fire, she should have told the butler immediately. But instead, she had the audacity to hide it just to avoid punishment. One of the maids grabs Deborah's wrist tightly, accusing her of lying in front of adults. Rosaline quickly steps in and asks if they're accusing the child of causing the fire. The girl has only been there for 4 days. The Archduchess immediately assumes she came in to replace those who were dismissed. Hugo says that it was the woman who hired her carefully and therefore didn't expect something like this to happen. All the butler is doing now is scolding her for hiring a troublemaker, making it clear that she doesn't have a good eye for choosing people. Rosaline is not pleased with the situation created and hates the fact that they chose a defenseless child to throw out. Hugo wants an order to act, either to fire Deborah or cut her salary. This situation shows how Rosaline truly differs from others. Remembering the case with Julian, she protected the boy, unlike these people, older than her, who are unjustly punishing a child. For that reason, the Archduchess refuses to let the girl take the blame. She says it hasn't been long since she was hired, and if she's expelled for this, no other place will ever hire her. Hugo tries to act virtuous, but Rosaline cuts him off, saying she cannot allow him to avoid taking responsibility. Even his soul freezes. The butler has no idea what's happening. Rosaline says that although she is the lady of the house, she cannot oversee all the servants by herself. That's why she entrusted him with the training and supervision of the new recruits. Hugo agrees with that, but the girl continues, saying it's his duty to pay attention to what happens around Deborah to prevent accidents. Yet he was careless. She can forgive the girl for being new and innocent, but Hugo, as the caretaker who has managed the servants of this estate for decades, cannot ignore his mistake. She questions his qualities as the butler of the Grand Duchy of Postenmeier. Now he's cornered, realizing Rosaline isn't some naive girl. The Archduchess of Postenmeier declares that his salary will be reduced for neglecting the training and management of new staff, since the responsibility of a butler and that of a novice are very different. Rosaline still gives him a chance to explain why he failed to prevent the accident caused by the girl so she can reconsider her decision. But Hugo simply accepts his fault and says he's glad that the lady of the house proves to be so wise. This leaves Rosaline confused. He's thanking her even after having his pay cut. Hugo says the late Grand Duchess once told him the same thing, that the higher the position, the greater the responsibility, that everything follows a hierarchy, and the one at the top must answer for the mistake. Smiling, the butler says that knowing a master one can respect is the greatest pleasure of a servant. Rosaline says she'll be in her room and makes it clear that they may come to her if any matter requires her judgment. Before she leaves, the girl calls out to her. The Archduchess asks if she's all right. Still shaken by what happened, with a sad look, Deborah thanks her for saving her. But Rosaline reassures her, saying she only did what was right and that there's no need to thank her for it. Even so, the girl has reasons to be grateful. The Archduchess would never have allowed the child to be thrown out like that. Her heart wouldn't rest easy. So it's also something she did for her own peace of mind. Rosaline is convinced that without power, one can easily become a victim, and Deborah simply didn't have that kind of luck. The girl says that's probably not the real reason she was accused. Deborah looks a little hesitant but decides to explain. A maid named Katrina said she didn't think the Archduchess was a bad person, and Deborah's mistake was agreeing with her. Then everyone began to hate her, saying the girl was taking the lady's side. That's enough for Rosaline to understand, so she doesn't ask the girl to say more. Now the Archduchess knows this isn't over. Because she scolded the butler, it will at least serve to start changing things from the top down. She's never liked the way the servants of this estate were instructed anyway. Later, once everything is settled, Rosaline is in the office and asks Hugo for the servants' work schedules. The butler says the Postenmeier family doesn't do that, which makes her question how they manage their work. They all have the same hours, working according to the times when the master isn't on the property. Everything from washing the bedding to maintaining the estate and handling all other necessary tasks is done then. By working in the master's absence, Rosaline begins to understand better why that maid once asked her to leave the room. She doesn't consider that method very good. Hugo doesn't quite understand her point. Rosaline then explains that this system was designed for the interaction of the household staff, and since Melchior returns home only late at night, they didn't need to show courtesy to their master during the day. However, she points out that the situation is different now. She mainly noticed some flaws around lunchtime, 1 hour for meals and 30 minutes for breaks, meaning there's a total of an hour and a half left idle. Hugo justifies that this time is necessary for everyone to maintain their strength, but she says she's not criticizing the duration. Rosaline explains that her concern is with the fact that everything in the estate stops during that period since everyone takes a break at the same time. The butler understands but argues that they only eat after all the basic maintenance is done, and that the chance of something happening in that short period is very low. But the girl reminds him about the fire that occurred during that supposed break, and she asks what he would do if an unexpected situation happened again. Hugo's silence is the answer that she's right. So Rosaline suggests selecting a certain number of people to work during lunchtime, but she reconsiders, realizing that if some of them work while the others rest, they would eventually hate their jobs and lose motivation. Curious, the butler asks if she has any solution in mind. Rosaline says they will adopt a shift system. At that moment, Melchior suddenly appears, calling for his wife, surprising her as he arrived home early. If he were a firefighter, there wouldn't be anything left to burn at this rate. Rosaline asks if he's all right, but the Archduke is frantic because he heard about the fire. The girl explains that it happened around the property and didn't spread anywhere else, although the interior of the building was burned. She assumes he's worried about the estate, so she gives him the unfortunate news that the place can no longer be used, but it was going to be demolished anyway, and says she already removed the burnt items, asking if they need to be cleaned. But Melchior makes it clear that's not what he's concerned about. The Archduke says he was asking if she is all right. Rosaline calms him down, saying she's fine. Even so, he heard about her act of heroism in the burning kitchen and asks her not to do something so reckless again. The problem is that this brings back bad memories of her mother scolding her, asking what she would do if she ruined something, and saying that if she did, she wouldn't go unpunished. Rosaline had expected praise and explains that if she hadn't acted, things could have turned out much worse. Then she bows and apologizes, saying she was wrong. Melchior's expression, which was once full of concern, now turns sad. Looking away from him, Rosaline asks if there's anything else she needs to do. At that moment, the Archduke is more concerned with whether she's hurt, wanting to talk about something unrelated to work, but he doesn't know how to begin. So he takes the initiative and asks what she did during her day. Rosaline doesn't quite understand what he means and ends up asking if Hugo didn't give him the report. Melchior says that's not it and tries again, more directly this time, asking what she ate for lunch. She's very detailed, listing tomatoes, salad, mashed potatoes, sausages, and a veal cutlet. The Archduke then asks how it was. Rosaline finds it strange since he already knows what it tastes like. So Melchior asks if there isn't a particular dish she'd like to eat. The girl says no. Her priority is getting used to Eastern cuisine. And to help with that, he even brought a chef from the main estate. Still awkward. He tells her she can ask him questions too. Melchior thinks about his day, which involved handling work documents and an audience with the Emperor. But he only replies briefly, "I worked today." Then he says he has to work again tomorrow. And Rosaline agrees, saying that must be tough. Before the conversation ends, Melchior gently grabs her arm and asks her to wait. The Archduchess asks if there's something he wants from her. A little uncertain about what she might hear, she asks what it is. Melchior is nervous, but still manages to say that he just wants to know if there's something he can do for her. Thinking about it, Rosaline asks if she can make Deborah her personal maid. As always, his answer is, "Do as you wish." And she thanks him with a beautiful smile. Melchior's shining eyes capture her beauty. As a result, he feels even more flustered. Later, meeting with Hugo, the Archduke asks about Deborah, and the man explains about the girl. Melchior sees this as an opportunity to learn more about Rosaline, so he orders that the girl be called immediately. Deborah is brought before him, obviously very frightened. Melchior notices this and asks if she's feeling unwell, receiving the butler's explanation that despite her thinness, she was only hired after presenting a clean bill of health from the doctor. He still wants to know why the girl is trembling so much. Melchior calls her name, and as soon as she hears it, she closes her eyes, even more terrified. The Archduke informs her of Rosaline's wish to make her a personal maid. He then asks if she knows the reason for that. Less terrified now, she says she's not sure. Her answer confuses the Archduke because she didn't deny it, yet made it clear she has some suspicion, so he asks about it. Stammering, Deborah apologizes and says she doesn't know. The girl sees it as if a terrifying aura were emanating from Melchior's body, as though saying, "Rosaline went so far as to choose you as her personal maid, and you don't even know why?" She starts crying, begging for forgiveness and for her life to be spared. Not understanding her reaction, the Archduke asks Hugo if he has ever executed any servant, and the butler denies it. That only makes it harder for Melchior to speak with Deborah. He learns from Hugo that the girl's salary is 15 gold coins per month. Melchior orders it to be increased 20-fold, leaving the butler stunned. Since that's a salary on par with an imperial knight, the Archduke tells Deborah that he will entrust her with an important task and asks her to consider this increase as payment for overtime. He also instructs her to find out what his wife likes and report it to him. Melchior wants to know even the smallest details, so he tells her not to overlook anything. Meanwhile, Rosaline is sleeping peacefully in her room, unaware that outside mercenaries are lurking. They find it strange how quiet everything is, assuming the patrol didn't reach very far. Their plan is to start a fire in the area and then capture the Archduchess for the person who hired them. But as they approach the building, it becomes clear that their plan won't work. No matter how much they search, there are no barrels of oil around. One of the henchmen asks what they should do and whether the boss is sure their information wasn't wrong. They can't even find anything that could easily start a fire. All these mistakes infuriate the leader, unaware that he's arrived too late to burn the place down. The boss kicks a wall that has a crack in it. As a result, it begins to widen. The building starts to collapse and they flee the scene. Soon after, Wilhelmina receives word that the operation failed. The Marquis says it was a mistake to trust mercenaries, especially after the failure of the previous fire attempt, which made security around the estate much tighter, making it even harder for them to infiltrate again. Wilhelmina asks if there isn't a better method. Auvers Richman knows one, and the Empress demands that he explain. All that's known about the wedding is that it will take place in an open-air hall. But since there will be many eyes watching, sneaking in unnoticed will be difficult. Therefore, the best option is to get someone trustworthy who can freely enter and leave the estate. The Marquis remembers that they'll have to hire a professional designer if they want a wedding dress and bouquet, and that securing those renowned artisans from the capital would make it easier to approach the bride without raising suspicion. Wilhelmina understands the plan well and knows it will be easy to get those workers on her side. But the next day, even that plan falls apart, because Rosaline never called for a seamstress. The Empress demands that the man explain what he means. Due to the stain of being the daughter of a criminal instead of ordering a new gown, Rosaline has decided to alter the one the previous Grand Duchess wore. This makes the Empress suspect a traitor among them since all her plans keep failing. At the very least, they'll have to change methods if they want to reach the girl. Far away, Melchior is in his garden, surrounded by roses with their pleasant scent. He quickly realizes it's a dream, a memory of when she came to him. Rosaline soon appears behind him. The man confides his fear of damaging the flowers that resemble her. Then she calls him Julian, telling him it's all right and asking him to come to her. In this dream, he's no longer Melchior, but Julian as an adult. He says that when he was younger, he didn't have the power to protect her. But after gaining strength, the woman was no longer there. Julian is once again in his boyish form, and Rosaline reassures him that everything is fine because she's still by his side. The boy panics, saying there's nothing he can do, and she asks if he doesn't believe her words. Calmer, he denies that. Even though it's just a dream, he wants to stay there a little longer. Rosaline tells him he is her pride, making Julian's shining eyes glow even brighter. However, she slips from his embrace. As Rosaline fades away, she tells her beloved Julian that she believes in him. This dream only makes me theorize about the supposed power she inherited from her father. Melchior wakes up. It had been a long time since he'd had that dream, and he even ended up calling his Rosaline by the name of his current wife. He hadn't dreamed of her since meeting the girl. Melchior finds this pathetic. No matter how much they resemble each other, in the end, they are different. He even questions why a married man would dream of another woman to the point that his heart races. Then remembers Rosaline's words, that the other woman was his first love, but he denies that thought, insisting that the other was his mentor. Still, he thinks he should apologize to his wife. In another room, a maid informs Rosaline about her husband. The girl finds it strange since it's past working hours, and she worries that something might have happened. She immediately goes to meet Melchior. Asking why he stayed outside instead of coming in, she also says she was told he had something to say. Having to say it is the hard part, but the Archduke surprises her by saying he's there to seek her forgiveness. With complete sincerity, Melchior apologizes to her. This surprises Rosaline, and also confuses her, as she doesn't understand what he's apologizing for. Even though the plan for a simple wedding went wrong, there's still no reason for this. Rosaline finally answers, saying that it's fine, that she knows he didn't do it on purpose since it was something that couldn't be avoided, while the Archduke, at the same time, thinks the girl somehow found out about his dream. He even wonders if this is what they call feminine intuition. Once again, the two are trapped in a cycle of misunderstanding. Nonetheless, Melchior apologizes again, saying that even though he promised to protect her, in the end, he acted arrogantly. Rosaline insists that it's fine and that she no longer cares about such things. After all, it's not like she can do anything about it. It's easier just to accept and give up. With sad eyes, Melchior asks her not to say something like that. And of course he can't forgive himself. Trying to understand what kind of feeling makes him so emotional when he's the one who did something wrong in the first place. Having dreamed of holding another woman, even though he's married, he wonders if he's at least upset that his wife isn't jealous. Melchior says it can't be helped, that it's a natural right, and that she should be angry. Wide-eyed, still believing he's talking about the ceremony, Rosaline asks if it's really that serious. She says it's not a problem, since it was already expected and that she's also preparing herself in case something happens. That catches Melchior completely off guard, because to him, Rosaline is implying that he's the kind of man who could have an affair with another woman. He can't believe he's been reduced to that. A dishonorable scoundrel. So he says he's not that kind of man, while the girl replies that there's no need to exaggerate. Melchior moves closer, wrapping his arm around her, saying he's not forcing himself, because he's her husband. He says he's sure he mentioned that he would fulfill all his duties, and she indeed remembers. The Archduke says that no matter what happens, his decision will never change. Rosaline doesn't know what to do in this situation, but is certain he fulfills his duties well, whatever they are. And if they're talking about that, then only one thing is missing to consummate the marriage. First, she looks around, worried that someone might hear, then asks him when they should begin, and he replies, from this very moment, leaving Rosaline completely in shock. The girl asks about his work. Since that night, Rosaline has been mentally preparing, though she still feels it's too soon. Not to mention they haven't even had the wedding ceremony yet. Melchior interrupts her thoughts by saying they'll do it after hearing her answer. He saves her from a panic without even realizing it. Rosaline feels relieved. Just a moment ago, the man was saying they should do it immediately, but now he seems to respect her decision. She thinks it's too soon for that, but as a couple, she knows they'll have to fulfill that duty eventually, even if it's all just a contract. Besides, she notices the Archduke seems very eager. Rosaline takes his hand, leaving Melchior surprised by her action. The girl feels his warm skin, and it makes her heart feel calm, as if she could rest easy while holding him like this. She isn't confident, but it's not something she can keep avoiding forever, and she's sure she'll be able to go through with it. Therefore, Rosaline makes it clear that they will see each other tonight. Melchior is confused, and she asks if he'll be home late from work. He says he'll arrive around dawn, but promises to come as early as possible. Melchior takes her hand and gently brings it to his lips, leaving a soft kiss, satisfied that his Rosaline is there. He can no longer deny that the other Rosaline was his first love. After all, one cannot change the past, but his wife now is the Crimson Rose, and he vows that from this moment on he will be loyal to her, for he was taught to live rightly and to take responsibility for his actions. Melchior calls to his beloved, declaring that no matter what happens, he will come to her that night and asks her to rest easy. Later, Rosaline is in her office. Her fingertips still tingle just thinking about what will happen that night. Noticing her unease, Deborah asks if the tea isn't to her liking. Rosaline explains that she was just lost in thought and that she'll drink it. The girl tries to stop her because it's cold, but the Archduchess says it's fine and even takes a sip to prove it. Her personal assistant asks if something is bothering her. She can't even tell what's wrong with her Grace's expression, noticing how nervous she seems. Placing the teacup on the saucer, Rosaline admits that she feels a little anxious. Hearing this, Deborah asks if she's not feeling well and suggests postponing the appointment, which leaves the Archduchess confused. The girl reminds her that today is the day the stylist who will make the wedding dress is coming. That makes Rosaline wonder what Her Majesty is planning, since she had insisted on reserving an appointment with the best stylist in the Empire as a gift. Deborah continues to insist on changing the date, but the Archduchess refuses, saying it's only to take measurements, nothing too difficult. She asks her assistant if everything will be done there, because if so, she'll have to organize some of her documents. Deborah informs her that it will be in the dressing room on the first floor, and that Johanna said the Archduchess can ring the bell twice when she's ready. Rosaline shakes a small bell and asks if that's what she meant, and the girl confirms. Suddenly, Rosaline becomes nervous, wondering what exactly being ready means. She starts worrying about what that could imply. Then she asks if by any chance the stylist has already arrived. With a big smile, Deborah nods. Thus enters Gertrude Barth, the best stylist in the capital. Rosaline apologizes to the woman for making her wait. She imagines it must have been uncomfortable for the stylist to wait for so long, but while observing her, she wonders if behind that refined exterior lies a typical high society personality. Rosaline has heard that Gertrude is an incredible woman, very proud of her work, and that she even refused the offer to become the princess's exclusive stylist. Rosaline also knows she has no right to ask why the woman lowered her pride enough to act so amiably now. Gertrude begins her work by asking the Archduchess to look at the 5 dresses and choose the model she wants. Afterward, she may select the fabric and accessories from the catalog. Rosaline considers this, deciding to choose accessories that will at least limit the damage to her reputation, even though that's not what truly matters at the moment. Meanwhile, Gertrude observes her, certain that the girl knows nothing about fashion and is just absent-minded, not expecting a woman from a disgraced family to understand such things. Deep down, she wonders why she, the #1 stylist in the capital, has to make a gown for the daughter of a criminal. Rosaline calls her attention by asking if she's aware that the wedding will be held outdoors. That completely catches the woman off guard. Rosaline explains that the original plan was for a simple ceremony in the chapel on the property, but due to the sudden increase in scale, they had to borrow the open-air hall in the park. Rosaline points to the dresses with a light bluish tone that complement several indoor decorations and details, but she asks if they won't look dull when worn outdoors. Unfortunately, the stylist has to agree. Even if she could maintain the pearl aesthetic, they wouldn't appear as luminous under the sunlight. Rosaline asks if it wouldn't be better to have one that's completely white or has a bit of silver mixed in. In addition, she wants more visible embellishments and notes that it would be troublesome if she had to constantly fix the train. She also reminds her that the Emperor and Empress will be present, so the dress can't look too plain but also not overly extravagant. Gertrude says it's unclear what exactly she wants, and if she doesn't specify it, she'll make the dress according to her own interpretation, which may not please the Archduchess during the fitting. Rosaline takes the opportunity to mention her height when wearing heels next to her groom. She makes it clear that a wedding has 2 protagonists, so that difference cannot be ignored. The Archduchess continues giving more details, saying that because Melchior is quite tall, if the upper part of the dress stands out too much, it will look awkward. Therefore, the silhouette should be fitted at the top and flare out at the bottom. Rosaline also requests reducing the volume at the front and sides of the skirt while extending the back train as much as possible, similar to the model she's pointing at. Gertrude says that doing so will make the front look too plain, and if it's designed not to flutter in the wind, it'll be difficult to use chiffon lace. The girl surprises her by asking whether figuring that out isn't precisely the stylist's job. Rosaline asks if covering the entire dress with handmade lace is the most expensive option, and the woman confirms. So the Archduchess says she'll take that one. The girl still has more requests, such as using pearls and white roses attached along the width of the skirt, small silver bells sewn into a mesh around the hemline, and embroidery with silver thread. Gertrude interprets this as if Rosaline were ordering 3 dresses. Rosaline denies it and asks if she didn't say that a wedding isn't something done alone. She asks to see the 3 designs she picked for Melchior and says she'll decide based on which one he likes most. The Archduke is looking through the catalog, clearly uneasy. Gertrude notes that Rosaline will follow whatever he decides. He glances at the decorations that will adorn the dress. The problem is, he has no idea what any of it means. Melchior would simply solve the matter by buying all 3 and doesn't understand why Rosaline is thinking so hard, since they'd all look perfect anyway. So his decision is that all 3 should be made. The Archduke clarifies that since Rosaline requested them, each with a different design. Gertrude points out that she can't walk down the aisle wearing all of them. That's when Melchior realizes it's the wedding dress they're talking about, and that he almost made another mistake by not recognizing his wife's intentions. But indeed, he knows she will look beautiful in all of them. Rosaline looks good in anything, whether it's something rougher or a glamorous outdoor dress, very different from what she usually wears. Melchior notices her intention to prioritize comfort over elegance. However, it's still an event where she needs to look presentable, and he thinks she won't feel burdened by it anyway. Following this, only one criterion remains, so he asks Gertrude what she thinks makes a dress truly suitable. The question leaves the woman completely frozen. After all, they were talking about choosing her Grace's dress. Gertrude grabs the catalog, trying to understand his question because, looking again, it's obvious that they're all women's dresses. Then, an idea comes to her mind. After all, the Grand Duke's original plan to have a private wedding ceremony was already suspicious, since most aristocrats use such events to show off their power. But in his case, he was trying to finish everything quietly in the chapel attached to the property and then leave immediately for the east, as if they were running away. Piecing everything together, she reaches a conclusion. His Grace really wants to wear a dress. Melchior asks why she's acting that way, and if there isn't one that would fit him. A little nervous, the stylist says there's absolutely no problem, but she's completely shaken by the thought of having to make a dress for the Grand Duke, the most challenging and innovative project of her entire career. After enjoying every bit of honor and wealth possible as a stylist, she doubted there was anything left to strive for. She never imagined something could make her heart race again like this. Everyone has a desire they can't freely express, but she thinks maybe Melchior has been brave enough to reveal his true self. So, to honor that, she chooses the most radiant dress, one befitting his position. The stylist points to the model and says it has the most impressive bobbin lace. Melchior agrees to that one. Then he says she may leave. Nervously, the woman asks if he hasn't yet chosen a dress for her grace. Pointing to the catalog, he asks if he didn't just do that. Once again, she completely misunderstands, believing they want matching dresses for the wedding. Thinking their love is so deep that they wish to experience the feeling of becoming one, Gertrude declares that she will create a perfect dress, one that leaves nothing to be desired, and promises not to avoid working through the night to make it happen. Heinz bursts into the office cheerfully, saying he heard about the stylist's visit. The blonde man asks if Melchior liked it, though secretly hoping this means they'll get to leave work early. Melchior replies that he has no such interest, though his opinion might change if it's Rosaline wearing the dress. That instantly kills the commander's cheerful mood. Heinz can't feel a shred of emotion coming from his boss and fears that, at this rate, they'll be stuck doing overtime again. He starts saying that he's sure Rosaline could have chosen her own dress, maybe she just wanted his opinion, and suggests that Melchior write her a note or something. Fortunately, Melchior listens to his advice. After all, if Rosaline asked for his opinion, he can't just ignore it. He has to write something to her, even if it's simple. Heinz is left behind, talking to himself. He mutters that if it was just a note, he could have written it right there. Not to mention, if it were like usual, it wouldn't even be strange for him to ask a servant to write it. All of which only makes Heinz even more curious about how secretive that letter must be. That's when the blonde man realizes his boss really does like her, much more than he had thought. Melchior begins his letter. "I saw the dress you're going to wear. It's beautiful. I'm looking forward to the wedding," but he stops. He can't just write lies. After all, he's only excited because of Rosaline. Besides, he hasn't even seen how she looks in the dress, so he thinks carefully about his words. He tries writing, "I'm looking forward to seeing you in the dress. I'm sure you'll look incredibly beautiful." But then he realizes Rosaline doesn't need a dress to look beautiful, so he changes it to, "I'm looking forward to our married life." But that sounds wrong too. He never imagined this could be so difficult. The Archduke wants to be sincere, plain and direct, just as things should be. He finally writes, "Rosaline, I'm looking forward to the moment when you and I become one. I'll do my best to come home earlier." Judging by the expression Rosaline makes, this message caused yet another misunderstanding between them. At first, she doubts whether it really means what she's thinking, until she pieces it together with what he said earlier that morning. Rosaline asks her personal maid to change the bedsheets because her husband will be coming tonight. Even Deborah is confused and surprised that the man himself will come. The Archduchess nearly lets slip that he'll be sleeping in her room but holds herself back, immediately thinking about what to do with her pajamas and underwear. She also asks the girl to bring her a painkiller. Deborah asks if she's feeling unwell, and Rosaline gives a flustered answer, saying she'll be in pain afterwards. All she knows are the basic facts about the matter, and she wonders whether she's supposed to undress herself or if Melchior will do it, and if she needs to know anything in advance to prepare, though she has no idea what she should actually do. Suddenly, the doors burst open as a servant rushes in, saying that Her Grace must come downstairs immediately. He announces that the princess has just arrived. Rosaline is startled by such an unexpected visit. She immediately heads downstairs. A beautiful young woman with ruby-colored eyes introduces herself as Anna Stroth, saying it's a pleasure to meet the Duchess of Postenmeyer. Rosaline greets Her Highness properly. Anna Strotha is the daughter of the former emperor and had proposed marriage to Melchior several times. From what Rosaline has heard, the princess was after the man's power and wealth, and she believes Anna Strotha is here because she feels deeply offended by the recent incident. Rosaline notices several boxes of gifts nearby and asks what they are. Anna Strotha explains that Rosaline recently went through a major incident and is just a few days away from an important event, so these are consolation gifts sent by the imperial family. She adds that she came as their representative. The princess compliments her beauty and asks whether she has ever attended high society events in the capital. She says that if Rosaline had participated even once, rumors about her beauty would have spread immediately. With a smile, Anna Strotha takes her hand, suggesting they have a private chat. Rosaline wonders if she's acting out of disdain or if it's simply her personality, someone who ignores proper manners. She also worries about what the princess wants to discuss. Anna Strotha expresses surprise at the mansion, claiming this is the first time she's entered the Postenmeyer estate. Already seated comfortably on the sofa, she remarks that no matter what she did, even singing, Melchior never once sent her an invitation. Rosaline sits as well, explaining that the preparations aren't very suitable since they didn't know about her sudden visit. Anais tells her not to be so formal, saying she doesn't care about such things. She adds that she only came for a casual conversation between women, so she asks if Rosaline could have her butler leave. Rosaline does as requested. As soon as Hugo leaves, the Archduchess thanks the princess for the gifts. Anaistrotha admits that her initial plan was to send even more, but since she was so eager to see Rosaline's face, she left in a rush without bringing everything. Then she shifts the topic, mentioning that she was rejected by Melchior 4 years ago. That's why she was so curious to see whom he chose to marry. And Rosaline introduces herself as being from the Crimson Rose family in the West, finding a polite way to keep the princess entertained. Anais comments that she's quite famous. She says it's because it's rare for parents to be executed for treason, and it's also the first time a fallen noble family has been restored to its former status. Rosaline is surprised that she could say such words so casually, but she knows it wouldn't be wise to get angry in this situation, especially since there are no witnesses. Hugo is gone, and that must have been part of the princess's plan. Moreover, Rosaline's reputation among the servants isn't good, so if she lost her temper and expelled the princess, strange rumors would quickly spread. So she decides to change her strategy. Rosaline says that she too had wanted to meet the princess someday. She mentions that she read Anaïs's graduation thesis, which stated, "Maintaining the balance of the world is an important matter. If there are honest men, there must also be lazy men." She continues quoting, "If all monarchs, who should be examples to their people, were only honest, that would be the same as denying the lives of the lazy. Therefore, if you are truly a benevolent monarch, you must naturally be lazy enough to give them a sense of kinship and hope." That's enough to make the princess ask why Rosaline memorized it. Rosaline says that passage was so memorable she couldn't forget it easily. With a smile, she adds that it's an honor to meet the person who wrote such a magnificent thesis about how even a monarch should be lazy. Her goal is to see whether she managed to hurt the princess's pride, and whether Anais still understands the point behind it all. And it actually works. Angered, Anais declares that when she becomes Empress, she'll shut down the academy. Then, brightening again, she apologizes for starting their talk so rudely, revealing that she intentionally provoked Rosaline just to see what would make her angry. The reason, she says with a laugh, is their social status. The two were being far too formal, and that made it hard to truly get to know each other. So she acted that way to get closer, though to Rosaline it only succeeded in making her an enemy. The Archduchess points out that such behavior was very rude, and that it's the first time she's met someone who would say something like that on a first meeting. Anais admits that part of her came intending to start a fight, since there was some jealousy mixed in. After all, she was rejected by Melchior. Rosaline realizes she may have misjudged her, that perhaps the princess truly liked him, and if that's the case, she must carry that wound for a long time. So she says softly that it must have been very difficult. Anais replies that it was hard to accept the collapse of a servant's dream caused by Melchior's skill. She adds that if she could transfer control of the central region to him, who already governs the eastern territories, then she could simply eat and play as much as she wanted without ever having to work. In the end, the princess simply doesn't want to work. She says that although the girl is different from what she expected, she still feels comfortable around her because Rosaline is a wonderful person. And she adds that Melchior never seemed like the type who would be satisfied marrying an ordinary woman. Rosaline is about to say that she's not as good as she seems, but Anais interrupts, saying that whenever she picks a fight like that, most people get furious, and a small portion just swallow it and ignore her. But she's never seen anyone absorb everything and calmly respond before. The princess says that since she only brought a few gifts, the rest will arrive later that day. They are gifts for the Archduchess, and Anais advises her to make good use of them while she's there. Princess Anaistrotha, though troublesome, doesn't seem entirely bad. Even so, Rosaline doesn't want to see her again anytime soon. Later that day, as promised, Melchior arrives home earlier than usual. He announces his entrance as soon as he opens the door. He's surprised by what he sees waiting for him. Rosaline is seated, wearing a light, delicate outfit. She greets him, though she looks very nervous. Melchior approaches and asks if she has prepared well. With some hesitation, she confirms. He asks if she's been losing sleep, catching her off guard. The Archduke says this because of the bottles of alcohol nearby and explains that those are for after the ceremony, when she becomes of age, and that it wouldn't be proper to drink before then. Rosaline points out that their marriage is already registered and asks if that doesn't create a loophole, but her husband says that even so, her body won't see it that way. He tells her that if she can't sleep, she should find another method, as alcohol isn't good for that. Rosaline explains she didn't prepare it because she likes drinking. She reveals she placed it there in case he wanted some, because that thing might be very difficult to do with a sober mind. Melchior grows confused, wondering if he might have said something that made Rosaline think he's an alcoholic. So he tells her there's no reason to drink, yet she insists. The Archduke clarifies that he only drinks when necessary, but tonight there's no reason to, not realizing that this disappoints her. While Melchior finds their exchange strange, Rosaline believes he's testing his wife's qualifications. She asks if there's anything else she should prepare. She explains that since Deborah is very young, she decorated the room with Johanna's help. Melchior says he understands and that she did well. That makes Rosaline wonder why he's evaluating her. She didn't do it for praise, but because she thought decorating the bridal chamber was part of her duties. Either way, she says they should sleep. But Melchior turns to leave, telling her to go ahead and get some rest. He stops when she asks if he's just going to leave like that. Melchior asks if there's some matter they need to discuss. Rosaline stands up and asks if it isn't he who has something to discuss. Very confused, the Archduke wonders what she means by that, and if he missed something during their conversation. Or maybe he made another mistake again. So he carefully asks why she thinks that. Once again, the two find themselves tangled in a misunderstanding. Rosaline asks what he said, while Melchior asks if there's any reason for her to think that way. She interprets it as him asking her to explain why she feels that way, and wonders if he's implying that everything was just a misunderstanding or something similar. After such a difficult day, barely able to gather her thoughts, she's still trying hard to be a good wife. Rosaline says she doesn't want to talk about it. She claims she has no reason, which makes Melchior ask if he did something wrong, but she quickly says there's nothing wrong. Even so, the Archduke presses on, saying he doesn't understand why she seems upset. Rosaline insists she isn't angry, but that she thought he might demand it since they're married. Melchior still doesn't understand, asking her to clarify what exactly he supposedly demanded, but she firmly says she doesn't want to answer. The Archduke steps closer, taking her by the shoulders, only to ask her to listen carefully. He has never demanded anything from her. He doesn't understand why she's upset or why she looks hurt. Melchior has no idea what he said that made her think it was a demand, nor what he did wrong. But if she doesn't tell him, he can't fix it. This makes Rosaline realize she wasn't being tested at all, and that it was just a big misunderstanding. She then asks if he really sent that letter for no particular reason. At first, Melchior is confused about what she's talking about, until he remembers the letter he sent. Then, Melchior becomes curious to know what she thought when she received it. She says she was a little surprised and puzzled, also thinking that the Duke seemed a bit impatient. Her words hit him hard. After all, Melchior had put so much effort into choosing the right words. It makes him wonder if he overthought it and ended up interpreting awkward phrasing as something normal. The Archduke says he must have written the wrong letter. Rosaline agrees, admitting that now that she hears it, she can see that might have been the case. She confesses she misunderstood everything, and that she's also not great at expressing herself, thinking that maybe she just doesn't match well with him. Opening up more, Rosaline says it's difficult to understand what her fiancé says at first, believing that perhaps it's because the culture she knows differs from the Eastern one. But to Melchior, there's no way she is the problem, which means he must be. So he says he isn't normal, leaving her confused. Melchior practically throws himself on the ground, saying that if another unpleasant situation happens again, it's because he's the strange one. Worried and startled, Rosaline tries to understand what all of this means. The next day, she doesn't look good at all, having been unable to sleep out of sheer frustration. She decides to take a walk to see if it'll help her feel better, but it doesn't. Suddenly, something catches her attention. A new path appears before her, one she doesn't remember seeing before. That sparks her curiosity about where it might lead. Rosaline decides to take the risk, noticing how odd it is that neither the annex nor the back garden are in sight. An unexpected gust of wind sweeps through, scattering petals along the path and forcing her to close her eyes. When it passes, she opens them, only to find a forest standing before her, surprised since she hadn't walked that far. With all the hints left across each chapter, I dare say the powers the Empress seeks are connected to the past and future. Anyway, Rosaline meets Julian there. The boy's eyes light up the moment he sees her. She, however, finds his excitement a bit strange. Julian greets her and says he never thought he'd meet her in a place like this, and that it's been a long time since their last encounter. But Rosaline finds it odd, since to her it's only been a few days. She asks the boy if he's being bullied again. She wants to know whether his classmates chased him there or if he ran away to hide, but Julian denies both. The boy reveals that he's been there hoping he might meet her again. Curious, Rosaline asks if he's been waiting there all this time, but he denies it too, sadly saying that he only does so when taking a walk, though he ends up spending too much time there. Rosaline feels embarrassed realizing that he's been coming to the place where they first met in hopes of seeing her again. She's never received that kind of attention, not even from her own family, so she feels butterflies in her stomach. Julian thanks her once again, saying it's because of her that he was able to organize his thoughts, and that the method she taught him was very effective. Out of envy for his good grades and his success, his classmates had threatened to steal his tests. Rosaline is happy to hear he followed her advice, and the boy adds that even his teacher was very pleased. Curious, Julian asks how she came up with a method to describe everything learned in an entire semester as an essay-style response. Rosaline explains she always studied a lot because she was never a genius. Those complex application questions were always difficult for her. Still, instead of giving up on answering, she would write down her entire thought process, swapping between the methods she'd learned throughout the semester. That worked so well that once her teacher told her it had been decided she'd receive the highest score. Little Rosaline even argued that she hadn't answered the final question, but the man said she had proven throughout the semester that she fully understood his lessons. He said exams are meant to assess comprehension, and she was qualified to receive the top grade. Later, they discovered that the problem had been intentionally designed to be difficult for students to solve, which allowed her to earn the maximum score. Either way, Rosaline is happy for the boy. Julian says that thanks to her, he achieved the highest score again, ranking first once more, which surprises her since it had only been a few days since she shared the method. Rosaline is amazed that in such a short time, he took the test and already received his results. And she also notices that Julian seems to have grown a little. The Archduchess says she's happy to know everything worked out. The boy smiles, saying he wanted to thank her personally. Julian then asks if, by any chance, they'll meet again. And immediately after, he asks if she's busy. This isn't exactly a problem, but besides being distant from her own family, it's hard for her to understand her husband. Yet somehow she feels like she's gained a friend, even though they've only met twice. Talking with the boy makes her feel like she can finally breathe. Rosaline asks if she should teach him the basics of self-defense fencing. Julian freezes, making her think he doesn't want to, but he quickly explains that he just didn't expect such an offer and feels very grateful for it. The boy is overjoyed. As she admires him, Rosaline notices that his eyes sometimes shine with a mysterious light. They're very beautiful, but when she stares for too long, it makes her feel on guard. Rosaline picks up a thin tree branch since they can't use a real sword, especially because such a situation wouldn't happen at the academy. Julian thinks the branch is too weak, worrying it might be better to find a stronger one. To him, it looks like it would snap at any moment if twisted by hand. Rosaline agrees. If he used it to strike someone, most opponents would lower their guard upon seeing it. The Archduchess asks him to imagine she's attacking his face and what he would do. Julian confidently answers that he'd block with his hands. Then she asks what he would do in a real fight. Julian replies that he'd probably grab and twist it, and she suggests he try that. Rosaline gets ready to attack. The boy follows her instructions, grabbing the branch. However, he soon realizes his attempt to twist it is a complete failure. Rosaline ends up letting go of the branch. Julian loses his balance and would have fallen if the woman hadn't caught him. Now, being so close to her, the boy feels embarrassed. Rosaline smiles because he almost fell. Julian quickly steps back, apologizing for what happened, but she doesn't mind. After all, she was only trying to teach him. She explains that a tree branch isn't a weapon, but a decoy meant to draw the opponent's attention while holding it. Rosaline decides she'll be his mentor from now on, explaining that a real sword isn't necessary. Something like this could actually be more useful. The Archduchess asks what he thinks about it. If he wants to learn more and still intimidated, the boy nods. That makes her laugh, and she asks him to return to his stance so they can try something new. After 30 minutes of training, Julian realizes it's not as easy as he thought. Still, the boy is deeply grateful for everything he's learned that day, wishing her a safe return. Rosaline says goodbye, wishing him the same. To her, a simple wave is enough instead of watching him bow. Calling her savior so many times is one thing, but he's truly a very polite and diligent child. Anyway, as she walks, she realizes she'll have to check whether this path connects to the Archduke's garden, and if so, it should be blocked for safety reasons. She notices that even though the forest is dense, the sunlight is still very bright. The rays are warm. It almost feels like she's in a dream. Then something catches her attention. It's Nicholas, who finds her on the path again. Rosaline approaches him, and he says that upon hearing she'd gone out walking without an escort, he rushed to follow her. But apparently she had only gone down this path and returned right away. Surprised, Rosaline asks if she really just came back. Nicholas says that she seemed to be heading toward the thicket, so he was going to follow. But she turned back immediately, and he asks why she's asking that. But Rosaline is lost in thought, thinking she may have made a mistake. Still, she's certain about how much time she spent there. To make sure, she asks what's beyond the forest. Nicholas explains that for the size of the capital's estate, it's not bad. The garden is still under renovation, so if her grace takes 20 more steps, she'll hit a wall. But thinking about it, the Duchess knows that if there's a wall, there's no way it connects to a forest. So she tries to understand how she managed to enter. It's not as simple as just changing locations, especially since she stayed there for at least 30 minutes, while according to the knight, she returned seconds after entering. Seeing her serious expression, Nicholas asks what's wrong. Rosaline denies anything's wrong, then asks if the property is far from the academy that's on the other side of the park, carefully explaining where it is. The knight becomes thoughtful. He recalls that there used to be a place attended by children of high society, particularly in cases where they were removed from combat training to become heirs, since it was safer to stay in the capital than in their own territories. But as far as he knows, the place was closed 5 years ago when the park was renovated, and the school was moved to the outskirts of the capital. This story completely takes Rosaline by surprise, and Nikolaus notices that she doesn't seem well. Not wanting to raise suspicion, she says she's fine and informs him she'll go to her room to rest for a while. All Rosaline wants is to escape somewhere safe. Almost at the end of the day, the Duchess wakes up. She's surprised by Melchior's voice. He's sitting there, signing documents. She wonders when she fell asleep, not to mention that the papers are the ones she was supposed to handle. Her fiancé tells her to rest a bit more, saying there's no need to push herself to work. But Rosaline insists on staying awake. As she sits down, her fiancé offers her some tea to ease her fatigue. She accepts, though quite suspicious, wanting to understand why everything was prepared for her. Rosaline doesn't like the drink much. It's too bitter, but she doesn't have time to think about that, because now that she's more awake, she starts worrying about whether Julian returned safely. For now, she isn't entirely sure what happened, but knowing the boy's history with spiritual abilities, she imagines he's probably had some difficult days. Without realizing it, Rosaline ends up whispering Julian's name. That doesn't escape Melchior's ears. This makes the Duchess panic. After all, she just called another man's name in front of her husband. Not knowing what to do, she forces a laugh, saying it's nothing. Melchior tells her not to apologize. She can call him by that name if she wants. Rosaline only makes things worse for herself by saying that Julian is her husband's middle name. Then comes the revelation. Julian was the Archduke's name until the emperors gave him the names Melchior and Eckhart. When His Majesty gives someone a name, it's customary to place it first. It means that person is deeply valued. Melchior explains that it's very rare for a child to receive such different and unique names. But Rosaline thinks Julian sounds quite ordinary, though too gentle a name for this towering man. Curious, she asks her fiancé why he never used it before. With a sad sigh, he says it's a name that no one calls him by anymore. Julian connects him to his time at the academy he attended in the capital and the relationships he formed there. Rosaline had thought her fiancé received his succession education at home from the start. After all, Nicholas had said the academy was mainly for aristocrats who were pushed out of succession disputes. Now, she's even more curious about his story, wanting to know how he managed to win the competition. All Melchior says is that many incidents occurred, though he doesn't remember any of them. All his memories before turning 18 are hazy, and he only knows the general details from records kept at the main estate. Sounding uncertain, Rosaline mentions that he met the other Rosaline 10 years ago. Melchior says that although he remembers fragments, the end of it all is faint. This helps Rosaline understand his obsession. She's the only part of his past he can still recall. If she was someone who helped him, it makes sense that he can't forget her. Suddenly, something clicks in Rosaline's mind, connecting the pieces that he was once a student of the same academy that was closed, and that the only thing Melchior remembers is Rosaline. She reaches a shocking conclusion. The woman Melchior has been searching for all this time might actually be her. Since Rosaline met that student from the academy, things have defied all logic. After all, that place vanished 5 years ago, and she somehow ended up there by some mysterious force. The space she was in with Julian even seemed to have a different flow of time. She wonders if, somehow, she met someone from the past, beyond space and time. Her question now is whether these two people are truly that different. On one hand, Julian is a polite, caring boy. She wonders if, even if the man claims to have no memories of his past, it's possible for him to have turned into this stone-hearted person. But for now, she can't draw any conclusions. Seeing her so quiet, Melchior asks if something happened, but Rosaline uses the excuse of being tired. The Archduke wants to ask her something. Catching her off guard, he asks if she's had lunch. He even wants to know what she ate, and Rosaline says it was lamb stew. Melchior's questions only get stranger as he asks how she ate it. Though confused, Rosaline explains that she used a spoon for her meal. With a serious look, the Archduke asks an even odder question. How did you swallow it? This is getting bizarre. And Rosaline can't understand where he's going with this interrogation. A few hours earlier, in his office, the Duke had asked his loyal commander whether his words were hard to understand. Annoyed, Heinz complains that he's been working hard but still wants to know why his superior is blaming him for something. But it's only a question. Melchior wants to know if people find it difficult to understand what he says. Cheerfully, the blonde replies that his words are perfectly clear. If that's not the issue, the Archduke wonders whether it's the way he speaks that makes things sound strange, or if his actions have somehow upset others. Meanwhile, Heinz can't help but feel touched by the sad puppy expression on his superior's face. He asks if Melchior did something that made his wife upset. The commander says he's used to Melchior's ways, but Rosaline isn't. However, he thinks he understands why she might not like it. Heinz claims that she isn't very affectionate, but that's only because Melchior gets straight to the point, ending conversations too quickly. And people form closer relationships when they share stories. The way the Duke talks makes it difficult for anyone to get close to him. Heinz says that, besides that, his boss never talks about personal matters and doesn't show interest in others. He asks how Melchior could possibly get closer to Rosaline if he doesn't even know much about her. That's why their relationship keeps feeling distant. Heinz gives an example, saying that his boss didn't even have breakfast and could get sick if he keeps this up, even though he's a healthy man. Melchior doesn't understand his intention in bringing that up. To the commander, it's obvious. He just wants his boss to stay healthy and happy, but the Duke tells him to stop saying nonsense and get back to work. That attitude, however, irritates Heinz. He says that the Duke treats his concern as something meaningless, hurting his feelings. With tears in his eyes, Heinz says, "Of course, someone like me, raised to be strong, doesn't get hurt by things like that anymore." Heinz doesn't want to just drop it. He wants to teach his boss how to hold a proper conversation, and it's also a sneaky way to take a break from work. Now back to the present moment. What Melchior understood from Heinz's words was that he should show interest in others by asking personal questions. He also shouldn't end the conversation too quickly. So by asking more detailed questions, he's simply following what he learned. But this all seems very strange to Rosaline. After all, Melchior wants to know how she ate. She simply put it in her mouth and swallowed. And he keeps going, asking if there were any chunks in the stew. Rosaline says she chewed everything, yet he still wants more details. And all she can say is that it all went down her throat. Then Melchior asks what kind of feeling it caused. This is getting creepy. And the Duchess wants to understand why he's asking such bizarre questions. She asks why he wants to know about that. Melchior says they're married. Isn't that reason enough? If it were about someone else, he wouldn't care. But since it's about Rosaline, he wants to know everything, no matter how small. However, he soon realizes he might be making the conversation uncomfortable. After thinking for a while, Rosaline answers that the sensation of swallowing the stew was warm, soft, and even tickled a little. Melchior asks for more details, and she says that after that, she licked the inside of her mouth with her tongue to clear the remaining taste. Rosaline feels extremely embarrassed that he made her say that, but the man denies forcing her, saying he just wanted to hear her speak. The Duke says she doesn't have to do that if it's unpleasant, but somehow the way he says it sounds oddly informal. Then Rosaline remembers that day when he revealed he wasn't someone normal. She remembers it clearly. And now, in this situation, she stops to think for a moment. Realizing that Melchior is actually a huge pervert, it makes sense now why he refused to marry the princess. If this is the kind of interest the Duke has, then in the end, it isn't that serious, though she's still not satisfied with it. Even if this is just a conversation, it still leaves her wondering why a man like him is trying so hard to do things right for no apparent reason. At least it's comforting to know that his condition only goes that far. Rosaline then surprises him by saying she'll continue speaking. However, that's a bit of a dilemma. After all, it's such a sudden thing. Rosaline explains that it's not that she dislikes it. She just believes she also has some responsibility in this. So she suggests they slowly increase the amount of time they spend talking together. Melchior's face lights up. His commander was right about improving communication. That decision leaves both of them satisfied. However, the smile he gives her makes Rosaline think once again that he's just a weird pervert. The next morning, very early, Melchior is informed that his wife is still asleep. After all, the sun hasn't even risen yet. He says to let her sleep a little longer. Then he asks the butler to have breakfast ready for when Rosaline wakes up and not to forget Alphonse and the Countess. After breakfast, Melchior gets up to go to work. Before entering the carriage, he looks back at his mansion, straight toward his beloved's room, and smiles, promising he'll return to her. Rosaline sleeps peacefully. It doesn't take long for her to wake up once the sun has fully risen. Resting helped the Duchess organize her thoughts. Being able to shift between the past and present from 10 years ago, she's certain now. The other Julian is Melchior. But regarding how she can walk between those two timelines, she still isn't sure how to do it. And what bothers her most is that the flow of time between them is different. For Rosaline, only a few days have passed, but for Julian, it feels like weeks. So even if she were to visit him every day, to the boy it would seem like he only sees her once a week. Besides, when she compares the times she meets him with the times she doesn't, there's still that difference. The flow of time between the two worlds isn't the same. It's as if time itself shifts to match the perspective of when she meets Julian, like magic. There aren't many records about magic, yet she wonders if she should take a closer look. Rosaline is about to enter the carriage when someone calls her name. It's Gertrude, running toward her. The seamstress wants to do a fitting for the dress and asks for a day when the Duchess could visit her boutique, since the wedding is approaching. But the problem is that Rosaline really wants to go to the library. so she tells the woman that she's busy and that the dress should be left as it is. After all, Gertrude already knows her measurements, so she authorizes her to proceed without fitting. But the seamstress isn't confident she can do that. The real issue is that Gertrude is under Her Majesty's orders to drag the girl out of the estate by any means necessary. But there's another reason that's far more important. When it comes to the dress, at least, the seamstress feels confident she's perfected her craft after making so many pieces. She could make it in any way possible. However, the same can't be said for the Duke's outfit, since it must match hers. And she can't even remember what he looks like. Gertrude doesn't know if he's been too busy lately, but every single one of her requests for a meeting has been rejected. She wonders if they even realize the wedding is getting closer, so she tries once more to convince Rosaline, even for just a moment. But Rosaline rejects the request. The Duchess explains that she barely managed to find time between her work schedule, so she can't waste it, and says they'll talk another time. She leaves, and the seamstress is left in despair. Rosaline finally arrives at the library. There, the librarian informs her that they currently don't have the relevant text she's looking for. The only option is to ask if there's another place that holds what she needs so that a request can be made. Although Rosaline wasn't expecting much, it's still disappointing that she didn't find a single one. After magic disappeared, the place it once occupied was overtaken by science and technology. Magical texts came to be treated as strange and baseless writings. Still, she wonders if any material remains. The librarian returns and informs her that the relevant texts were archived together at the regional library in the Northeast, but there are no books left. Apparently, when that library was buried in a landslide 6 years ago, all relevant publications vanished with it. This is the last thing Rosaline expected to hear from her search. And personally, I believe nothing that happened was a mere accident. Although few records remain for academic research, they're not very helpful, since they're not even summaries, just lists. Her question is whether one is born a mage, or if it's something heavily influenced by lineage. If that kind of phenomenon existed in her family, there should have been a record of it. Rosaline wonders if, instead of being something inherited through generations, it might be more like a mutation that occurred within her. As far as she knows, descendants have always been rare in her family, yet both she and Alphonse were born in this generation. Moreover, the successors of the Crimson Rose line have always been men throughout history, meaning her brother should have come first. With that, Rosaline concludes that her existence is unusual. This creates a troubling question in her mind. Why have heirs always been so rare for them? Their bloodline has always been tied to the maternal side, so she wonders if it's possible that only one is born per generation, spanning hundreds of years. This worries Rosaline deeply. If that's the case, she wants to look into families with similar situations, hoping to find a clue about the mutation. She hurries to search through the family records. With each discovery, the Duchess's face grows more tense and wrinkled from concentration. Families like Penborough, Bloodyheim, and Redliev, after reaching the point of having only a single descendant, vanished because their final patriarch died without an heir. She even analyzes the causes of death in each case, from accidents to illness. There are many recorded instances, and the Duchess finds it remarkable that no rumors ever spread about a firstborn curse or something similar. Even so, many of those family names she has never heard before, which explains why they received so little attention. The fact that they were weak could be because their lineage was rarer than their management skills. Since there was only one heir, great care was taken to prevent accidents or illness. And they probably had private tutors, likely never even imagining leaving their family estate to explore their lands. The Crimson Roses are no different, for after spending half their lives confined to the estate, the patriarch's management skills were never sufficient. Moreover, Rosaline's father became a criminal, and if Melchior hadn't saved them, she wonders if, at this very moment, they'd be dying in prison. Remembering this, she recalls her debt to him. In any case, this research has been fruitful in showing that her family isn't the only one going through this. The Duchess believes that somewhere, someone must be studying these cases, so she decides that her next step is to look for written records about the rise and fall of aristocratic families. The next day, Gertrude once again tries to approach Rosaline for a dress fitting, but the Duchess apologizes, saying she needs to go to another library. And the same thing happens the following day. This continues for a while, with Gertrude always trying to take her grace with her, and Rosaline always managing to escape. The seamstress begs her, saying that if Rosaline doesn't trust her, she should at least give her 5 minutes. With no other choice, Rosaline finally gives in this time. While trying on the dress, the Duchess thinks she might still be able to visit the library if she saves some time. But the real problem is that none of her searches have turned up anything useful. Days pass, and finally the wedding of the Duke and Duchess arrives. The guests are already whispering in disbelief. After all, the Ice Duke is actually getting married. Everyone is excited to finally see the bride. to find out who the young woman is that captured the great Duke's heart. The decoration is magnificent, and the guests are enjoying themselves. Away from the curious eyes of the crowd, only a few people know how Rosalind is feeling. Deborah is among the few who can see the Duchess and feels deeply moved. The young maid is also glad the weather turned out perfect for the ceremony, thinking it must be a sign that everything will go perfectly from the start. But secretly, Rosalind knows that their beginning is far from perfect. As for the dress, Gertrude truly proved her skill. Even after rejecting all invitations to visit the boutique, Rosalind could never have imagined that something made so hastily during a fitting could turn out so beautifully. The woman had even whined about not having time with Melchior, though Rosalind didn't quite understand what that had to do with her. Either way, Gertrude's craftsmanship is so impressive that it makes the Duchess feel self-conscious when she looks at herself in the mirror. She silently promises to thank the seamstress properly later. That makes her wonder where the stylist is. Rosalind asks her personal maid about Gertrude. Deborah tells her that, according to the butler, the woman came at dawn carrying a huge load. However, it was her assistant who delivered the wedding dress. That leaves the two of them curious about what's inside the box Gertrude brought. The guests are already seated. The bride and groom begin their entrance. Their outfits are elegant and complement each other perfectly. As they walk, soft murmurs can be heard throughout the crowd. One whispers that he now understands why the Grand Duke promised marriage even before reaching adulthood, because it was this kind of beauty he had pursued for years. Another says that it was thanks to Rosalind that Melchior became patriarch. The princess is there as well, breaking etiquette by shouting to the bride how beautiful she looks. Rosalind is simply relieved that she arrived at the imperial palace safely. For the emperor, a special seating arrangement was prepared, since his albinism prevents him from standing under the sun like others. Having had no interaction with the Empress, Rosalind hopes the woman interprets this as an act of goodwill. From her tent, Wilhelmina watches the young woman, remarking that she had no reason to see her in person. If Rosalind had accepted the invitation to the boutique, she had planned to take advantage of the opportunity to knock her out and abduct her. But Gertrude failed to handle that properly. The Empress laments that she wasted time being busy instead of summoning the girl and bringing her by force. All her plans were ruined. Now, she wonders where her husband is. He said he was only stepping out for some fresh air and still hasn't returned. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Gertrude has fallen asleep until she suddenly wakes up. Startled, she looks around, trying to recognize where she is. She checks to make sure she actually finished the Duchess's dress. Unable to entrust the task to anyone else, she made it entirely by herself and even transported it. It had been hard work. She finds it odd that Melchior hasn't shown up, and she has no idea what time it is. Gertrude stands up quickly, thinking the Duke must have gone elsewhere after seeing her asleep. The tent flap opens, and the sudden light stings her eyes. A peculiar figure enters. It's the Emperor, who asks if she is Gertrude. Upon her confirmation, Balthazar says he's heard much about her from his wife and asks if she is a seamstress. Only then does Gertrude realize who the man in front of her is. She bows, apologizing for not greeting him properly. With a gentle smile, the Emperor says that isn't what she should be apologizing for. After all, he's heard that his wife has had a rough time because of her. Immediately, she begins to apologize again, but that isn't why Balthazar is there. With a mere snap of his fingers, the Emperor splits the woman in two, intending to use her soul for a while. Back at the wedding, the ceremony continues. The two exchange their vows. At that moment, Rosalind feels her body grow heavy. It's not the dress, and she assumes it might be the heels being too high. Melchior whispers her name, trying to get her attention. The Duke takes her hand to place the ring on it, and thus declares that two bodies have become one. With that, the ceremony ends, but Rosalind's vision continues to blur. Dizzy, she stumbles backward. Her only fear is falling there and ruining the Duke's reputation. Melchior asks if she's all right. He doesn't even allow his beloved to fall. Before that can happen, he lifts her into his arms. Everyone looks on in awe, thinking his grace is quite the wild one. But Melchior ignores his wife's pleas to be put down and asks if she wants to show everyone her form. She refuses, fulfilling his wish to stay as she is. Melchior refuses to let her walk alone. He insists on carrying Rosalind all the way to the carriage. Before entering, she worries about not giving her farewells, but the Duke has already done so before leaving. He's entirely focused on his wife, convinced she's in pain, promising they'll return soon. But Rosalind feels no pain. Instead, her eyelids grow heavy, and so she loses consciousness. Rosalind wakes up in her bedroom. She opens her eyes as sunlight hits her face. Immediately, she wonders how long she's been asleep and whether the wedding ended well. A voice tells her to stay in bed a bit longer. Her vision is still blurry, so she can't clearly see who it is. But from the silver hair, she guesses it must be Damien. Except it's actually Carmen. She introduces herself as a gynecologist from the eastern region, and for some reason, the Duchess finds her familiar. Ah yes, Rosaline remembers Damien. Carmen says, "It happens that we share the same parents. I'm his older blood relative, or simply put, they're siblings." Rosaline asks the reason for her visit, and the doctor explains that Damien called her because the Duchess fainted the previous day. Carmen says she took the overnight train and arrived just now. That's how Rosaline learns she's been asleep for an entire day. This makes her worry something might be wrong with her health, but the doctor believes she simply needs rest, having overworked herself lately. Not to mention that she's been sleeping less to spend more time in the library, unaware of the harm that could cause. Carmen remarks that it's usually perfectly healthy people who end up dying unexpectedly. The doctor offers her a vial of medicine to help her rest. Rosaline thinks about how they left immediately after the wedding, not even getting the chance to properly greet the guests. Even so, she agrees to take the medicine. The effect is immediate. She can't even keep her eyes open. Now she understands why the doctor advised her to continue resting. Sometime later, Rosaline wakes up again. She's greeted by Deborah, who asks how she's feeling. Apparently, the Duchess has rested enough. The girl continues, saying that the doctor recommended Her Grace take more time to rest, and that Melchior left a message for Rosaline to follow Carmen's instructions. Rosaline notices the flowers her maid is arranging and asks who sent them. Deborah isn't sure. The butler only said to place them in the room. She assumes they were a gift from His Grace. Rosaline smiles at that and tells the girl she doesn't need anything else for now. She just wants to rest again. As soon as Deborah leaves, the Duchess relaxes. She regrets not seeing Julian again, hoping he wasn't offended by her absence. Her gaze drifts to the flowers she received as a gift. Rosaline can hardly imagine that clueless man sending flowers. She'd rather believe they came from someone else, perhaps as a birthday present. Still, there's a chance they came from Melchior. She picks up the bouquet of roses. Bringing one close, she inhales its scent. Suddenly, the petals begin to fall, turning a shade that resembles the sea. In an instant, Rosaline is no longer in her bedroom. A very familiar voice calls her name. She turns to find Julian there. Strangely, he tells her she shouldn't have pushed herself so hard. Rosaline quickly realizes she's still in her nightgown, making the boy think she came to see him despite being unwell. Julian's tone is sad as he says he was very worried about her. After all, it's been 2 months since they last met. This shocks the Duchess, since for her, only a few days have passed. She hesitantly asks if he's been waiting all this time, and he nods. Julian says he knew she wouldn't just disappear without saying goodbye. He admits he had a feeling she knew he was waiting and that she would definitely come see him, and Rosaline feels that trust is almost like a fervent prayer. To Rosaline, the time they've spent together feels too short for him to trust her so deeply, yet he shows such faith in someone he barely knows. The Duchess suggests that instead of training, they should just talk today. Ruffling his hair, she explains that she came in a rush and didn't prepare anything. Julian tells her there's no need to apologize for anything, as he takes off his blazer to place it over her shoulders. Rosaline smiles, thanking him for the gesture. However, Julian takes it far too seriously, saying they should go to a shop to buy her some clothes. Apparently, the Duchess doesn't have much of a choice but to follow him. Julian takes the lead as they look for a dress shop. Worried, Rosaline says she came so suddenly that she didn't bring any money, but the boy assures her he has enough. The Duchess doesn't want to take money from a boy, especially knowing that his family doesn't support him, so she considers selling her jewelry, but the only thing she has is her wedding ring. Something catches Rosaline's attention. A man on a stage calls for everyone to come closer, declaring that whoever can defeat the one-armed swordsman will earn 20 times their wager. Seeing an opportunity, Rosaline borrows a gold coin. She raises her hand to take a chance with the bald man. As she walks toward the stage, people whisper about the strange woman. The man asks her name. Rosaline knows nothing good would come from revealing her real name. Someone might remember her in the future. She thinks of a name no one has used yet, one that can't be traced back to her. So she says her name is Melchior. And honestly, this is starting to feel a lot like Dark. The man tells her to step onto the stage and choose her weapon. Julian, in the audience, shouts for her to be careful, but his mentor has no intention of getting hurt. Rosaline analyzes the area, realizing the stage is far too small to swing a long sword properly, and she'll only get a few chances to attack. In this case, there's only one option. People are shocked by her choice, even asking if she knows it's a combat sword. The bald man smirks, saying he's sure those frail arms couldn't possibly hold a real sword. He asks if she truly believes she stands a chance against him, if she's certain she wants to challenge him with that thing. His stare is intimidating, but Rosaline isn't fazed by it. She notes that with only one arm, he can't attack and defend at the same time. Though she's not naive, he must be skilled to make such a risky bet. A long sword definitely isn't suited for fighting on such a cramped stage. However, instead of holding the weapon by the hilt, the bald man grips it by the blade. Rosaline knows she must consider every detail before fighting a stranger like this, and she doubts he's easy to deal with. No one would risk that much money otherwise. She realizes that this way he can use the hilt for defense, so she can't just aim at his side. That leaves her with only one choice. Rosaline makes a move that leaves the audience in shock, but soon they burst into laughter, asking if she even knows how to use a sword. Even young Julian looks worried about her decision. The referee, impatient, declares the fight begun. Rosaline faces a man twice her size and strength, with only the advantage of having an extra arm. She takes the first step forward, and even he's impressed. The bald man thinks they're making him fight a lunatic. His only plan is to knock her down and end it quickly. He tries a knockout strike, but Rosaline dodges it easily, using her agility and height to her advantage. It opens a perfect chance. She steps in and lands a hit on his chin, then kicks his sword away. Her boldness infuriates him. Now he doesn't care about holding back. He intends to hurt her for real. His punch slams into the wooden floor instead. The blade is already at his neck as Rosaline calmly says he dropped his sword. She tells him he shouldn't have underestimated her just because she didn't draw a dagger, and that apparently she's won. Then she asks if he agrees. The bald man raises his hand, admitting defeat. The crowd erupts in excitement at the outcome. Rosaline goes to claim her wager. After all, she was promised 20 times the reward. Trembling from his loss, the man nervously says he'll pay her 20 gold coins. Night falls, and Rosaline walks beside her student, now wearing her new dress. It's fortunate that the gold she won was enough to buy one, though the sleeves are very puffy and the fabric pattern is dark and old-fashioned. Nothing she can do about it, since that was the style 10 years ago. Looking around at everyone's clothing, she realizes this fashion is currently popular in the era she's in, even if it's outdated in her own time, which is technically the future. This way, she can blend in quite easily. Meanwhile, Julian has that same enchanted look as always and says she looks very beautiful. Embarrassed, Rosaline laughs softly while thanking him for the compliment. She isn't very used to things like that. After all, we should remember what her life was like before meeting the Duke. Rosaline notices she doesn't feel as tired as earlier, which makes her want to walk a little more. Thinking about it, not even in her own time did she have many chances to stroll through the capital. She's always been so busy working at the mansion that she never really got to see the city, and now she feels like she can finally breathe freely. As she walks through the capital, Rosaline notices something curious. At the end of a narrow alley, she spots a fortune-teller's tent. It reminds her of her ex-fiancé, who was really interested in that kind of thing. Back then, she didn't care for superstitions and just thought it was a strange hobby. But now that all these bizarre things have been happening, getting a reading might not be such a bad idea. So, accompanied by Julian, she heads toward the tent. The boy comments that he didn't know she was interested in fortune-telling, but she admits it intrigues her a little. Inside the tent, a hooded figure greets them, saying they're a pair of lovers. That catches both completely off guard, and Rosaline immediately denies it. Her answer totally disappoints Julian, though she doesn't notice, because she's more focused on the fortune-teller's next question, asking which of the two wants their fortune literally read. Although Rosaline finds the situation suspicious, she states clearly that she's the one who came for the reading. The fortune-teller asks her to sit in the chair and, while moving their crystal ball, asks what the Duchess wishes to know. Rosaline doesn't put much faith in them anymore. After all, if they're truly a seer, shouldn't they already know what she wants to ask? She's not sure what to say. She considers asking something like, "I keep traveling through time and meeting my husband when he's just a boy. What does that mean?" But with Julian sitting right there, that definitely wouldn't be a good question. So instead, she simply says that lately she's been experiencing some strange things. Rosaline explains that it's been about a month and a half since it all started, and for 2 weeks before that, she'd been having strange dreams. Those dreams were really weird and repeated themselves constantly, but then they stopped. And since then, she had almost forgotten about them. The voice she kept hearing in those dreams sounded a lot like Julian's, but that was before she had actually met the boy. She asks if it's possible to hear the voice of someone you've never met in a dream. The fortune teller asks for more details about these strange things, but Rosaline says she can't talk about them. She says she just wants to understand why this is happening and how to make it stop. Hearing that, the fortune teller begins stirring the crystal ball again, ready to start the reading. They tell her right away that she's in a very difficult situation, that they can see her worries draining her strength. The fortune teller says she can't solve the problem alone and that she feels powerless before this great fate. Those words hit Rosaline like a blow. She stands up from the chair, saying she's heard enough and just wants to know how much she owes. Before she can leave, the fortune teller says there's one more thing. They say that it's not her, but the young knight beside her who must put an end to her troubles. Rosaline stops upon hearing that. Julian freezes, terrified as he asks whether this really depends on him. And that's where today's story ends. Things are getting really crazy, right? What do you think that fortune teller meant when she said the boy would be the one to end Rosaline's problems? Do you think Julian is really Melchior from the past? Or is something else going on here? Let me know your theories in the comments. I'm curious to see what everyone thinks. This story is called A Marriage Contract with Two Husbands, and I've covered it up to chapter 27. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so I can bring you the next chapters soon. Kisses, and see you next time.